There we go. Welcome, welcome everyone. I hope good morning, and if you are in the West Coast, and good afternoon if you are in the East Coast. We have to admit, yes, we are admitting everyone, and I am going to start with a very powerful video.
Adım Ekin derdi yok. Ataylıyım. Boğaziçi Psikoloji'ye Türkiye 20.si olarak girdim. Sinir bilim alanında uzmanlaşarak Alzheimer ve otizm tedavisi üzerine çalışmak istiyorum. 2 Ocak'tan bu yana yaşananlar beni Türkiye'de akademik kadroların liyakata göre değil, sadakate göre doldurulduğu gerçeğiyle yüzleştirdi. Artık ülkemde dinlenmediğimi ve istenmediğimi düşünüyorum. Ülkem için çok üzgünüm.
İsmim Bengisu Kaynar, Kayseriliyim. Boğaziçi İktisat'a Türkiye 3.sü olarak girdim. Türkiye'de kadın istihdamını arttırmaya yönelik çalışmalar yapmak hayalimdi. Demokrasiyi ve kurumumu savunduğum için sürekli terörist ilan edilmekten çok yoruldum. Ülkemde artık istenmediğimi ve dinlenmediğimi düşünüyorum. Ülkem adına çok üzgünüm.
Adım Ali Demirhan, Trabzonluyum. Boğaziçi Politika'ya Türkiye 49'su olarak girdim. Beni yetiştiren projelerine gibi bir akademisyen olmak ve öğrenci yetiştirmek istiyordum. Son bir aydır üniversiteye maruz kaldıkları bana hayalimi gerçekleştirebilecek bir Boğaziçi ve Türkiye kalma vericini hissettirdi. Artık ülkemde dinlenmediğimi ve istenmediğimi düşünmeye başladım. Ülkem adına çok üzüldüm.
Ben Mert Arslanalp, Aydınlıyım. Boğaziçi Bilgisayar Mühendisliğini ilk güne girerek kazandım. Bir kadın mühendis olarak kendimi yetiştirmek istememdeki en temel motivasyonu doğduğum topraklara yazılım ve teknoloji alanlarında fayda sağlayabilmek. Fakat son yaşanan olaylarda öğrencilerin ve akademinin arkasında durulmaması beni hayal kırıklığına uğrattı. Artık ülkemde dinlenmediğimi ve istenmediğimi düşünmeye başladım. Ülkem adına çok üzüldüm.
Ben Yusuf Efe, Mersinliyim. Ülkemi temsil ettiğim uluslararası fizik olimpiyatlarında Avrupa birincisi oldum. Boğaziçi Üniversitesi Elektrik Elektronik bölümüne de Türkiye birincisi olarak yerleştim. İleride hayalim, Türk Akademisi'nde kalarak yapay zeka alanında öncü çalışmalara imza atmak. Ancak son bir aylık süreçteki demokratik taleplerime karşılık şiddetle karşılaşmak beni derinden etkiledi. Artık bu ülkede dinlenmediğimi ve istenmediğimi düşünmeye başladım. Ülkem adına çok üzgünüm.
İşte bu çocuklar bu ülkeden gittiler. Bunlar da gidecek bunlar. İlk 300'e, ilk 400'e giren çocuklar. Bu ülkenin olmazsa olmazları. Şimdi o çocuklara hapse atıyorsunuz, tutukluyorsunuz. Tutamıyorsunuz ya.
When we saw videos like this, we talked at the board of the Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association, and we thought we should let Boğaziçi faculty come and tell us what was happening that made the Boğaziçi students so upset. Since January 1st, several things have been happening at Boğaziçi, and today you'll be hearing from faculty who are either teaching there currently or have taught there in the past about what is happening and how we can interpret all of this in the long term of things. Welcome to this panel that was organized by the Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association. I would like to just thank my colleague at UC Davis, Director of Information Technology at the College of Letters and Science, Jeremy Phillips, who took his holiday day and came to us to join us and help us with technical difficulties we might be facing. And he also helped me secure a Zoom license that accommodates larger number of people. I'm very grateful. I'm also thankful to Garame Saidi, who is our intern at OTSA and a UC Davis undergraduate student. I'm not gonna, we have decided to keep the introductions very short so that we can actually focus on what needs to be talked about. But if you're interested, you can check out Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association online on our website. You can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, or you can join HTurk and still receive our messages. And hopefully we'll also have a new membership category for international scholars of Ottoman and Turkish studies soon. We do have other events, a monthly series of What's Up in Turkish and Ottoman Studies. The next one is this. Today, though, we are focusing on something that we have not focused in the past with the same intent, with the same intensity, academic freedom. And there we are cooperating with Middle East Studies Association that has many functions and many activities. International Journal of Middle East Studies, all of you know. The annual meeting, all of you know. But maybe advocacy is not something everybody has heard as much as they should. We have in MESA, and our chair will talk about these in a minute. I'm only sharing these pieces of information with you so that you can easily find them online if you wanted to look for them, what kind of advocacy MESA is doing, and Committee on Academic Freedom, the kind of letters this committee produces. In the last month, there were 4 letters issued on Boğaziçi University, but Academic Freedom Committee also issues letters on American affairs. You can find online the letters that this committee issued also to American universities. Without further ado, in order to move quickly through the panel today, I will introduce you to my colleague, Laurie Brand. Laurie Brand teaches at University of Southern California, has a very long CV, but what I really would like to draw your attention to today is her role as the chair of the Committee on Academic Freedom at MESA since 2006. In that capacity, she reviewed tens of letters that this committee wrote, many of them on Turkey. Laurie, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Baki, for putting this together. Günaydın, everyone, or iyi akşamlar for those of you who are in Turkey. Baki has gone through a lot of the information that I could have presented about the Middle East Studies Association. I just want to say a few words. I know many of you are familiar with it. Let me just emphasize a few of the things that he stated before we get started today. The Middle East Studies Association was founded in 1966 to promote scholarship and teaching on the Middle East and North Africa. It is the preeminent organization in that field of Middle East studies. It publishes the journal, the International Journal of Middle East Studies, and we have at this point about 2,800 members worldwide. What I want to emphasize is this is a nonprofit association. It is a scientific, educational, literary, and charitable organization according to US law, but it has no relationship to and it receives no support from the United States government or any other government. The Committee on Academic Freedom, which I've had the privilege of chairing, is one of the standing committees of MESA. And as Professor Tezcan mentioned, we work on cases in the Middle East and North Africa, but we also work on cases in North America, so on cases in the United States as well as Canada. And you can find all of our letters of intervention as well as responses that we receive to them and updates on ongoing cases on the page that is the CAF, the Committee on Academic Freedom webpage that's part of the MESA website. All right. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce a distinguished group of academics who will speak on today's panel. These brief introductions can't really begin to do justice to the many and varied accomplishments of these fine scholars. I think Baki is going to show some biographical information as I do these quick introductions, but please, for further information, do consult these additional pages that we'll be showing you. So I'm going to introduce our speakers in the order in which they'll speak. So I'll do all of the introductions here up front, and then we can go directly into the discussion for today. All right, so our first speaker will be Professor Mert Arslanalp. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Boğaziçi. Before joining Boğaziçi in 2016, he not only received his bachelor's degree in political science from Boğaziçi, but he also received his PhD in political science from Northwestern University. His research and teaching concentrate on the comparative study of contentious politics, democratization, and urban politics in Turkey and Latin America. Our second speaker, Professor Mine Erder, is a professor at the Department of Political Science and International Relations, also at Boğaziçi, and the head of the Human Development Research Center. She's published extensively on various aspects of Turkey's political economy, including social policy, populism, foreign economic policy, migration, the informal sector, and poverty. And more recently, she's been analyzing urban transformation in Istanbul's neighborhoods as microcosms of Turkey's political economy. Next, Professor Üstün Ergüder, who's trained as a political scientist in England and the United States. He joined what was then Robert College as a faculty member in 1969. And so he experienced the transition to Boğaziçi firsthand. He has held a number of administrative positions until 1992, when he was elected as rector by his colleagues. Part of what is the contentious issue we're dealing with today. That election was then confirmed by the higher education authorities and finally by the President of the Republic. He served as rector for 2 full terms until 2000, when he retired and moved to Sabancı University. He's currently the chair of the executive committee of the Education Reform Initiative at Sabancı University. Next, Professor Zeynep Atay started her academic career as an assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Boğaziçi in 1987. She was then promoted to associate professor and then full professor in the year 2000. In addition to her academic teaching and work, she has also held numerous administrative positions at Boğaziçi. They include registrar, summer term coordinator, dean of student affairs from 2008 to 2012, Director of International Affairs Office, 2017 to 2019, and Vice Rector, 2016 to 2021. Next, Professor Adhem Eldem has been teaching Ottoman history at Boğaziçi University since 1989. And since 2017, he has also held the International Chair of Turkish and Ottoman History at the Collège de France in Paris. His research and publications focus on late Ottoman social, economic, and cultural history, with particular emphasis on archaeology, photography, Westernization, and Orientalism. Next, Professor Ersan Kalaçoğlu is professor of political science who's been working on political participation, voting behavior, and political representation throughout his academic career. He taught at Boğaziçi between 1984 and 2002, and he currently serves as an emeritus professor at Sabancı University in Istanbul. Next, Professor Kemal Kılıççı is a graduate of Boğaziçi University. After receiving his PhD at the City University of London, he served at Boğaziçi as Professor of International Relations between 1989 and January 2013. Then after retiring, he took up a position as a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. He completed his term at Brookings in February of 2020 and currently is a non-resident scholar there. His area of specialization has been Turkish foreign policy and refugee studies. And our final speaker will be Professor Binnaz Toprak, who taught at the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Boğaziçi for 32 years. And following her retirement, served a 4-year term as a member of parliament in the Republican People's Party in the Turkish parliament. So that is just a very short introduction to this incredible group of scholars who will be speaking with us today. So I think without any further ado, I will turn the floor over to Professor Arslanalp.
Let me just say one thing. We will be taking questions via chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to direct them to Professor Brand as our speakers are giving their short speeches. And then in the second half of the meeting, we'll address those questions. Professor Brand will be channeling them to the speakers. Please make sure which speaker you mean to answer your question if there is a particular speaker in mind that you have. Thank you so much.
Great. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here with you and with so many of my former professors tonight. I'd like to thank Professor Baki Tezcan from OTSA and Professor Laurie Brand from MESA for putting together this important panel and having, giving us the opportunity to get the word out. As per the informal division of labor among us, I'd like to walk you through the events of the last 6 weeks. I'll try to be as brief as possible, so I will just focus on some of the milestones to be able to give you some context and to kind of set the context for the rest of the discussion for tonight. And after finishing up this event narrative, I'll give the floor to Mine Hoca, and if there is some time left, then I'll also share some of my remarks on what has been going on at Boğaziçi. So let me share my screen with you. Right. The events that brought us here tonight started on January 1st when President Erdoğan appointed a new rector to Boğaziçi University, using the powers he first acquired under the state of emergency in 2016 when he dismantled the rectoral elections in all public universities. No one in the university was informed, let alone consulted about this decision. As faculty members, we had absolutely no say over this appointment. Most of us had not even known who Melih Bulu, this new appointed rector, was. We later learned that he was the former rector of 2 private universities, was also a former politician from the ruling AK Party. While our former rector, Mehmet Özkan, was also appointed, a decision that we also protested back in 2016. This was the first time since the military regime of the 1980s that someone from outside of the Boğaziçi faculty was appointed as the rector. And therefore, the decision immediately sent shockwaves among the university community, also the larger public, as it was rightfully perceived as a threat to Boğaziçi as we know it and its institutional existence. On January 3rd, we, as the faculty members, issued our first public statement that you see on the right on the slides, declaring that we do not accept this undemocratic decision and that we will not give up on our university principles. These principles, accepted by the University Senate in 2012, highlighted the importance of autonomy, university autonomy, to preserve a horizontal decision-making process, and academic activities free from political intervention, meritocratic faculty hiring system, and a pluralist campus life, all of which we deem necessary for an environment of high quality research, teaching, and individual development. On Monday, January 4th, students organized their first protest right outside of the university campus with very large participation, in spite of the fact that most of them were actually out of town due to the pandemic. And we know that actually some of them traveled from their hometowns to defend their university. What began as peaceful protests at noon led to violent scenes when police began to forcefully disperse students in the late afternoon, leading to this iconic picture where the security handcuffed the gates to prevent movement through them, which also took the issue to the national news. In the meantime, both the pro-government media and the authorities began to display what is now all very familiar tropes of criminalization, implying and in fact explicitly stating that there were terrorists among students, that Boğaziçi students were being manipulated, etc. Next day, on January 5th, as faculty members, we began our symbolic protests by turning our back to the rectorate silently at noon for half an hour. And since January 5th, we've been holding these vigils every week on Monday to Thursday in rotation, and on Fridays with very large participation, when we also read our weekly public statements that underline our demands as well as the actions of that week. On January 6th, the entire vicinity around our campus was, put under what could be described as police siege. The entire neighborhood was barricaded with multiple checkpoints, armored vehicles in every corner, and extreme levels of police presence, all done to prevent new student protests. And since then, this situation continues. We are still under this heavily barricaded police siege. Students respond to this protest ban by moving their protests into the campus and to other districts like Kadıköy. Since then, they've been actually very creative in developing peaceful ways of protesting. The specific appointment and the underlying appointment system. Here are some of the photos from their protests that have been continuing on, which included concerts where they playfully played adapted the lyrics to the situation, yoga sessions, symbolic elections, deliberative forums, art exhibitions, open lectures on current political issues, and a lot of chanting, dancing, and singing right in front of the rector's office. Equally important has been the way they actually manage social media and media presence by producing visual and written statements, like the one that you watched at the very beginning of this panel, to intervene in the public discourse and express their own perspectives on what has been going on. So from fact-checking images to video clips to live streaming to media interviews, they actually in many ways deflected the criminalizing and stigmatizing representations that the authorities and the media deployed against them. And in my opinion, actually, they've been quite successful at appealing across the usual divides that define Turkish society. In the meantime, as academics, we have continued our symbolic protests, organized online forums with more than like 300 faculty members, created task forces, given media interviews, and reactivated the Senate Commission to develop a template of a democratic and autonomous university governance system, reform for future public debate. Meanwhile, our Senate and University Executive Committee members refused to hold official meetings with the appointment rector. Throughout January, dozens of faculty members actually refused rector's offers to fill in the vacant vice-rectoral positions, and as well as other administrative positions. And actually, until the first week of February, the new rector couldn't find anyone to work with. And during this period, both our alumni in Turkey as well as like across the world, and other faculty members from other universities, high schools, and institutions have given their, extended their support to our struggle for university autonomy, meritocracy, and academic freedoms. And here's a photo from ODTÜ, a protest organized by ODTÜ faculty members. The conflict unfortunately escalated in the first week of February after a picture from the students' art exhibition was seized by authorities and pro-government media as evidence of insult to religious values, hence an opportunity to reframe the Boğaziçi issue along the familiar lines of cultural polarization in Turkish society. From the Ministry of Internal Affairs to the Directorate of Religious Affairs, an array of governmental figures directly targeted LGBTI+ students with hate speech, calling them deviants, terrorists, etc. The appointed rector himself joined the social media campaign. 2 students got arrested. Police entered the premises of the LGBTI Candidate Club for criminal investigation, which, by the way, had nothing to do with the art exhibition itself. The rector shut down the club without following the internal procedures of Boğaziçi, and the decision was first announced to the public by the Director of Communications of Presidency, and not the presidency of the university, the presidency of the republic. In the next days, the tension escalated. Protests spread across Istanbul and other cities, and the police responded with repression. On February 1st, 108 protesters were arrested in front of Boğaziçi gates. The same evening, a police battalion entered the South Campus premises for the first time in 30 years to disperse the student protests in front of the rector's office and taken into custody 51 of our students. In total, to this day, more than 500 citizens were taken into custody. 9 students are still under arrest. 24 students are under house arrest, and with another 100, or perhaps I think more than that, are under travel bans. And as we continue to protest in the next days, actually, not only protesting the decision and the appointment system, but also the kind of police repression that targeted our students and other students around Turkey, our faculty members also began to be targeted by the pro-government media agencies and social media trolls, describing them as militants, provocateurs, terrorism supporters. Unfortunately, President Erdoğan himself joined the smear campaign by directly targeting our former professor, eminent political economist Ayşe Buğra, on February 6th. And finally, 2 new faculties. On the midnight of February 6th, we got subjected to yet another undemocratic top-down presidential decision that violated university autonomy by any standards. Erdoğan decided to open 2 faculties, a law school and a communication school. There hasn't been any demand or preparation on the part of the university bodies to create these new faculties, nor there has been any deliberation, preparation, discussion at the Higher Education Council as stipulated by law. So from where we stand, the single most important purpose of this decision seems to be the creation of a new faculty cadre willing to work with the appointed rector and redesign the university in line with the political expectations of the government. And as we stated in our public statement last week, we consider these decisions as gross violations of university autonomy and a threat to our academic freedoms, high quality teaching and research environment, and meritocratic hiring system. And in many ways, this latest decision proved to us how legitimate and rightful we were in opposing the initial rectoral appointment. It was precisely this kind of decision that we thought this process would facilitate. So let me stop here. I guess I exceeded the time that was allocated to me. So if there is more time left later on, I'll add some remarks of my own on this ongoing situation. So thank you.
Well, Mert'cim, you didn't leave anything for me to say. You summarized it all so well. I'm just going to pick up from where you left, and then just basically underscore a couple of points actually that you've already made, but just because we were given the job of sort of wrapping up everything and sort of presenting or framing the discussion in the current format as we're the currently active professors there. Obviously, this is an issue of academic autonomy. I want to underline that. It's just I just want to give you some of the bullet points of what we're protecting. It isn't about academic autonomy and why, and I don't need to tell to this audience why academic autonomy is so important, but this has been an issue in Turkish politics in terms of the government university relations for a very long time, and it's not new, and all of my professors will attest to the fact that this is been deteriorating for quite some time, obviously going back to the establishment of the Higher Education Council, which was a sort of a direct attempt to intervene into the governing of the universities as such. And this has been an ongoing process, and Boğaziçi has been somewhat of an exception to this trend, trying to create its own zone, if you will, especially with the election of Üstün Ergüder, who was a participant here, through this establishing this kind of an election system, which I'm sure will be discussed in this context. And so Boğaziçi University in that sense has been relatively exceptional as an experience. I don't mean to sort of go about talking about Boğaziçi's exceptionalism and make it into a sort of and turn into the sort of this accusation that has been going on of how elitist this university is and how sort of a small island as it is. It's not. It's a public university, and this is something I want to underline, with a lot of professors that are committed to the idea of public education, which is why we kind of sort of value the quality of our students that are coming from all different parts of the country, as you've seen in that video, and they have been coming through a very highly selective process. So this is one of the things that makes Boğaziçi very exceptional. It's very diverse. It comes, sort of the best, the cream of the cream really comes through a very rigorous national examination, and and most interestingly, it creates a very heterogeneous, both in terms of class, background, a student body that we all relish, and we find it extremely valuable in terms of the student pluralism, student diversity. The other thing that, of course, we pride ourselves in, apart from the student body, is our own governance model. Now, we're not saying we're perfect, obviously, but we have developed our own ways of running the university. And for us, according to the law, the rectors are incredibly powerful. But our rectors have never been powerful because we have managed through 80-some commissions, different kind of commissions, Senate and the University Executive Board. We have so many commissions that are doing different kinds of work. And, sort of to imagine establishing a program usually takes more than, God knows, 2 years. Where we go through detailed curriculums, sort of course descriptions, and every single due process is taken through different commissions and gone through the Senate process. And I think, obviously, this is a very unique experience in that sense, that we have managed to, over the years, establish this kind of a horizontal governance model where the rector is simply a coordinator, frankly, a facilitator. Sort of in sharp contrast to the kind of sort of excessive centralized power of the rector. Our rectors have always relished the idea of, yes, we are going to try to guide the university, but we're also going to be listening, mediating, deliberating with our university faculty members. And that's why, the socialization to the university in our campuses, really, of socialization of the faculty, really comes through working in these commissions, comes through working in the university governance and learning how other people operate, learning how the university governs. And that is precisely why, in this particular context, even though this kind of top-down direct political intervention has occurred in so many other universities, there has been a unanimous objection to the style of appointment of the rector across the faculty, primarily because the faculty themselves, our members, know that this is an incredible invasion of to our own governance model, and it is, and it's a direct intervention into our own horizontal model of governing, if you will. And that, I think, it is also part of the exceptionalism. I don't think in other cases where there has been this kind of appointment, the faculty has always been divided or has been very difficult to create that kind of near unanimous unity in some ways in terms of the faculty members to come together, respond in this kind of a unified fashion. And I think one of the things that is also interesting is that it's sort of we all agree in our forums, in our own discussions, that this is fundamental in terms of maintaining the integrity of the institution itself, in terms of maintaining the diversity of both the students, diversity of ideas, our legacy of deliberation and academic expression and freedom that has been such an incredible part of our university experience, both in terms of students as well as faculty. What is also been alarming, though, and that's something I want to, my time is almost up. What is also alarming is this sort of the packaging that has come in with this kind of with our own protest. And I'm going to leave it there and then don't elaborate that much. But the packaging has been, unfortunately, has fallen into the sort of overall polarized political context in Turkey, where the faculty and the students have been sort of called terrorists, as I said, or all kinds of dissent, all kinds of disagreement with the powers that be, has now been packaged, has now been going into the similar fault lines of the country, to the polarized nature of secularism, piousness, to the polarized nature of securitization, obviously, criminalization, vilification. So unfortunately, we are now faced, even though what we demand is obviously very much related to economic freedom and economic autonomy, we have now been packaged and targeted in terms of perceived as a threat as a major form of dissent into in this kind of a polarized political environment. And it is that polarization that we are now unfortunately being packaged as, and that complicates a lot of our discussions as such. But I don't want to end with a sort of a pessimistic note. What has been wonderful in this experience is that we have also come together as a community and have sort of realized the importance of our solidarity, and we are not leaving anytime soon into this mission of protesting this top-down intervention. And even though we may not achieve anything at the end, since this is quite asymmetric, we will continue to protest, and we will continue to voice our opinion and dissent on this particular matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Eder.
Sorry, I just transitioned to Ms. Professor Brand, Professor Tezcan. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Eder. We now turn to Professor Ergüder.
Do you hear me now? Yes, okay. Thank you, Laurie, and thank you, Bakire, for organizing this event. It's a great pleasure to be here to see all former colleagues. And it's also very interesting for me, or it's a pleasure for me, to speak after Mine, who was my student. And I believe Mert was a student of Mine. I don't know if I'm right, but I presume it's right. Well, I'll give you a history of how we developed these values, the values that Mine talked about at Boğaziçi. I came to Boğaziçi in 1969 when it was the Robert College Yüksek, or the Robert College, the four-year college operation, as I would translate. But as soon as I arrived in 1969, there were discussions of Robert College, that the future of Robert College Yüksek, or the four-year operation, was not very bright. The Board of Trustees in New York was trying to give it up, and the Constitutional Court in Turkey ruled that private higher education is not constitutional. So, to make a long story short, within 2 years, the campus at Bebek, for those of you familiar with Istanbul, the campus at Bebek Bebek is a district of Istanbul on the Bosphorus, was transferred to the Turkish government on condition that it would be turned into a university. Robert College moved to another campus. It became a co-educational school and strictly high school. And Robert College became Boğaziçi University on the Bebek campus. Now, of course, these formative years were very important because we were given some time to transit or to adapt ourselves to the so-called universities law in Turkey, the law 1750 as we know it in the academia. And it was troubling times. We were very much concerned with the consolidation. We were very much concerned with the consolidation of the heritage that we took over from Robert College, but that heritage did not include. All the principals or the directors of Robert College were appointed, and in 1971, when the Turkish government assumed the campus to turn it into a university, the founding rector, up to the late Abdullah Kuran, was the Turkish director under the director of Robert College. He assumed the rectorship. He was appointed by the Ministry of Education as the rector of the university. Those were also years of student unrest in Istanbul in the 1970s, especially 1970s. But the university was able to handle the student unrest with its very open, transparent, and democratic environment. We were able to contain that. In fact, one of my students described the university at that time as Switzerland in the middle of the Second World War. And what we inherited from Robert College was not an elected president or a rector, but a governance through extensive faculty participation at all levels. We used to meet very frequently. We used to elect our deans, and it was a very horizontal, transparent, collegial organization during those days. And we also inherited a very strong student-centered policy system. Students were very important. They were the center of attraction for us. Student activities were encouraged. Student activities were a very important part of the system. The Boğaziçi Yüksek, or the Boğaziçi University, differed from other universities at that time because we, for example, did not have the chairs that Istanbul University had. I don't know if you're familiar with that system. The chair system was a very hierarchical system with a professor at the top, associate professors, and assistants. They were not even teaching members of the faculty. But Boğaziçi was a very horizontal organization. Everyone with a doctorate, was a faculty member. So what we are trying to, in the 70s, what we were trying to do, we were trying to adapt ourselves to the law, and the law was not, law 1750 was not very constraining in that sense. Because it was, law 1750 emphasized the autonomy of the faculties, the election of the deans, and the election of the rector. But the rector at the time was not a very powerful figure. He was really the leader of the Senate under law 1750. But what happened in 1980 after the military intervention, the universities were blamed for student unrest in the country. And I'm not saying that this was the only motive, but one of the most important motives behind the new law, the so-called higher education law, was student unrest. It was an attempt to tame the universities. So, and at that time, just before 1980, Boğaziçi University had its first elected rector under law 1750. Professor Semih Tezcan in 1979 was elected after our founding rector retired from the rectorship, and Semih Tezcan was elected as a rector. So we had our first rector, but in 1982, after the enactment of law 2547, that is the higher education law, we got an appointment out of the blue, very similar to this day. Our rector was appointed from our neighboring university, Istanbul Technical University, a well-known engineer. And also faculty deans were appointed by the Higher Education Council without any consultation with the university. So this was a very, very important blow to the heritage that we were building on, the heritage we adopted from Robert College, the heritage of collegiality, the heritage of consultation, the heritage of transparency, the heritage of the importance of each faculty member, the heritage of making decisions in meetings, in faculty councils. So in a way, this made a very important impact of the psyche of the university. I described the period between 1982 and 1992 as a period in which there was an uneasy coexistence with the system. To be fair, the rector appointed in 1982 was a good academic. He sort of tried to build bridges with the faculty, but that proved difficult. He was sort of, we felt that he also felt that, unwanted. In fact, one of the descriptions among the faculty during those days, that he was a British colonial governor appointed by Ankara to its colony, the university. So but of course, what made those years very difficult was also some of the measures that the Higher Educational Council took. That is, they reorganized the faculties. For example, in the Faculty of Administrative Sciences, we were going through a very important experiment. We were experimenting under the leadership of Sheriff Mardin with interdisciplinary departments, sociology, political science, and psychology. What the new law did was disbanded all these. They moved the two of the departments to the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and all that experiment really came to nothing. Of course, this discouraged and disappointed many faculty. But until 1992, the faculty sort of tolerated the situation. But in 1991, the talk started among faculty that we should really express ourselves. So what happened was, after many deliberations, the faculty met. They had informal elections. They ranked 4 candidates from top down, and they took this list to Ankara and argued that these were our candidates to the authorities, to the prime minister. I see picture of Baki. It means stop. I will stop in a very few seconds. So what happened at the end was a new law. There was an amendment to the law, and with that amendment, universities got a hybrid system of election of rectors or appointment of rectors. 6 candidates would be elected by the university. That would be narrowed down to 3, and then 1 rector would be elected or appointed by the President of the Republic. Does that mean I have to stop? I guess so.
Thank you very much, Professor Erguder. This wonderful richness of the history and just showing the various struggles that have taken place over the years, I think is really helpful in putting all of this in context. Let's now continue with Professor Zeynep Atay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And some of you might have noticed that I'm the odd one out in this group because I'm the only chemist, because the others are either historians or political scientists. My claim to claim in this group, I guess, is because I have been in the administration of the university for so long, having taken many different positions, the last one being the vice rector with the previous rector, Mehmet Özkan. And at some stage I asked Baki Tezcan whether I should be out of this group, and he said, no, stay in and tell us what's happening or how you conducted the university affairs during your vice rectorship. Well, almost everything has been said, but I'd like to remind you one more time that whatever is happening at the university, whatever happens at the university, whether we want to open a new program or we want to change one of the contents of a course, it all starts from the department, the laws of all the small units at the university. The department groups, the faculty members of the departments come together and decide on how to change a program, the degree program, or the contents of a course, or add a new course, and then they send it off to the level above. Either it's the board of a school, or the faculty, to the dean of the faculty, and the faculty decides on what to do with the proposed program or course or whatever it is. And then eventually it goes to the rectorate, where it is discussed by many commissions, committees, all sorts of things. And eventually it reaches the Senate, and the Senate members decide on whether to send this change, to make this change, if it's just a change in the contents of a course, or if it's to open a new department or something similar, then they decide whether it should be sent to the Higher Education Council. Unfortunately, we have to go there eventually if we want to open a faculty or a department. In the almost 34 years that I've been at the university, we have not opened a faculty, but we have opened new departments. And I remember how long it took us to open the linguistics department. I know it probably took about 10 years of discussions. Ethem nods his head, on and off, right? We turned it down, and then we decided to discuss it again and everything. So eventually we did open the linguistics department, which was already inside another department. All the courses were being given and everything. But somehow all these had to be discussed at all levels, and everybody had to be convinced if we really wanted to open this department or not. Same thing goes for graduate institute programs. And the funny thing is, when we decide to open a new department or a program in an institute, a graduate program, we have to do we have to do our homework very well. And we have to go through everything. We have to say we have the physical rooms, the place for the department, whether we have the necessary equipment, if we have the right number of faculty members, what kind of courses we have to offer to the students, the new coming ones. And I can think of many millions of things that we have to discuss, and including the area of the classrooms that the students will be seated, because if there is going to be 50 students in the classroom, it has to be so many square meters, etc., etc. And most of the time, by the time we reach an agreement where everybody says, okay, let's send this to the Higher Education Council, the Higher Education Council turned us down so many times, refused to open the courses, the departments or the programs we wanted to open for many trivial reasons. So it was a great shock to hear just about 10 days ago, to wake up to, not even wake up to go to sleep with the opening of the 2 new faculties. We had no saying in that, considering the burden we had to go through just to open one simple program. This was something incredible. We just couldn't believe our ears. We just couldn't believe what was happening. But then you have to realize that the this was the mission of the appointed rector. He came with the purpose of doing all this. He was sent to us because he knew this was going to happen. He gave the indication. I have talked to him. I'm one of the few people, I guess, who has met with him. He has given me the indication that some of the things were going to change at the university. So this was one of them. And now I hear that there's going to be some new, maybe buildings being built on different campuses. Not on the Güney campus, I guess, because we don't have any room. But there is things happening at Kandilli. I personally have seen some of the things being changed there. And then there is a new dean appointed. It hasn't come officially. We haven't heard it officially yet, but it's been on the news. Somebody appointed by the Higher Education Council, something we just couldn't believe again. But this is like a nightmare, actually. And I believe there's going to be quite a few number of new faculty members joining us. Again, something we had asked for. We wanted new faculty members in our departments. The Higher Education Council never allowed us to have more than a certain number of, you all know, the professorships or the assistant professorships, etc. But now there is going to be a large number of new members joining us. And we have no idea whether we'll have a saying in the appointing of these people, of these new faculty members. This is a shame. This is, I've worked with many different rectors okay, I don't have any time, but this is what, okay, I should maybe stop, but I hope we can change things. We have to stick together and, dayanıyoruz. We're not accepting it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Atay. It was also, I think, extremely important to help people understand how bureaucratic procedures can be even under some of the best of circumstances. And of course, now this is not the best of circumstances. Let's move on then to Professor Erdem.
Thank you. Thank you, Baki Tezcan. Thank you, Laurie Brand. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor. Let me start by saying that I'm a historian. I see dead people, right? So, but more seriously, I'm constantly torn between the temptation to see patterns developing over time and the fear of hasty generalizations and anachronistic comparisons. Nevertheless, the present situation forces me to explore the possible historical dimensions of the problem we are facing today. Professor Ergüder has looked at the recent past. I intend to go further back in time and to widen the angle in order to focus on the confusion I believe exists between the notions of state, government, and public institutions in Turkey. In the summer of 1876, that's a historical quote, as Mithat Pasha was trying to draft a constitution, Ethem Pasha wrote to Saffet Pasha, and I quote in Turkish, "Bize konstitüsyon değil, enstitüsyon lazım." It's not a constitution we need, but institutions. A prophetic vision if one considers that the present government proposes to draft a new constitution, which is likely to strengthen even more its hold on the country. I believe that this is precisely the problem of Turkish politics and has been the problem of Turkish politics for the past century and a half. The fragility of institutions leading to the weakening of the state. This may sound strange in a country whose politicians keep bragging about the power and strength of the state, yet I believe it is this weakness, the weakness of the state, that makes the state a constant prey of governmental encroachment, which often leads to cannibalization and takeover. Sultan Abdülhamid in the 1870s, 1880s, he's my bête noire, inaugurated the process by dismantling the still fragile and sketchy institutions of the Tanzimat, and by replacing a still timid rule of law with arbitrariness and unpredictability. on which he eventually built his autocracy. He also innovated by using ideology, in fact, Islam, in a modern way to polarize the population in the wake of the exodus of Muslims from the Balkans after the crushing defeat of 1878. After him, the Unionists, the İttihatçı, used a very similar strategy based on defeat and polarization to conquer the state, manu militari, and turn it into a dictatorship managed by a clique within the party and leading to the tragic consequences we know. Their successors, the Kemalists, didn't have to destroy anything, as the Great War had already done it for them. So what they did was build the state anew, designing it from the very start as a perfect overlap of state and government, as embodied in the single party rule of the CHP. The transition to pluralism after 1945 revealed that the opposition, the Democrat Party at the time, intended to do exactly the same thing, that is to conquer the state, using a mix of populism and Islam. The 1960 military coup was a backlash of the old guard, who made sure that the core of the state remained in quote unquote safe hands, the army and the judiciary. The rest became a relatively liberal and democratic system, which functioned pretty much like a sandbox from which political actors and parties could be removed at any moment if they were to misbehave. And this is indeed what happened every decade or so from then on. The present government has brought this practice of conquering the state to its Bonapartist perfection. They have managed to stay in power long enough to conquer the state completely, while at the same time taming the traditional quote unquote watchdogs of the republic, the army and the judiciary. The adoption of the presidential system has crowned this endeavor, bringing into effect a de facto single party rule reminiscent of Kemalist times. What they're attempting to do now is to conquer the last pockets of autonomy that remain. Boğaziçi is just one of them. The boundaries between state, government, and public are now blurred, if not altogether erased. State and government have become one, and autonomous institutions that are being turned into departments of government. Many probably believe in Turkey that because it is a state university, it is only legitimate that Boğaziçi should be governed by the state, or at least that an appointment by the state is in the nature of things. The appointment of a president is thus perceived as the consequence of a legitimate top-down chain of command within the state structure. What they fail to understand, or what some probably understand too well, is that universities are precisely among those precious institutions which represent a crucial element of the public weal as distinct and autonomous from the government, and which guarantee the legitimacy of the state as well as the preservation of a public sphere. If this historical pattern proves to have any merit, and if Boğaziçi is just one episode of a larger plan to conquer the state, this means, first, that a solution is highly unlikely, at least a solution based on negotiation. And second, that we may soon have much more to worry about than just Boğaziçi. Gloomy as this might be, I'm forced, in a sense, to make this historical conclusion. Otherwise, I share all my colleagues' views about the good old times when we had a university, including those terrible, terrible commissions. The only commission we didn't have was probably the commission of silly walks, but we were close to that. But God, do I miss them. So I'll end with this, and I think I've just completed my 6 minutes. So I'll end with this, with a gloomy historical perspective on the bigger picture in Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Even though it's a gloomy, perhaps, picture, it certainly, I think, forces us to confront the very real challenges, and particularly this relationship between the state and autonomy and public space. So thank you very much for that. Let's move then to Professor Kalacioglu.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Baki Bey, and also thank you, Ethem. You paved the way for what I'm going to say. If you thought that Ethem's points were gloomy, don't listen to me. I'll put you some political science into all of this. I have been calling this new regime that had been erected after 1982 as Neo-Hamidianism. It's a reformulated picture of Hamidianism. The only thing that was not in the picture was the reincarnation of Abdülhamid. Now we found it. And therefore, we are operating in the same context. The style of rule is exactly the same. There is a constitution, but the constitution does not bind the government. So we live in a period of constitutional hypocrisy. As Ethem mentioned, there is no line between government and the state. The governing party seems to be all over the place. It's all blurred, and all decision making takes place through the pinnacle of power, where the institution of the presidency happens to be, and the president rules arbitrarily. Indeed, we are in a state of what Emil Durkheim calls anomy. And that is a value widely shared by the Turkish population. Ali Charkol and myself unearthed that in the 2006 study and published it in a book called Rising Tide of Conservatism in Turkey. If you're interested, you can have a look at that. And therefore, the constitution simply is ignored by those who rule. What does this mean? Well, I appear on national TV networks from time to time. And when I suggested that the Constitution has an Article 130, which indicates that the universities have academic autonomy. And this had to be respected by those who make any decisions about the universities, including the president. And somebody who was involved in the same panel with me said, you know, what does this mean? Does the rector appointment to be made by the university president could not be made as he wished? There is a new law. Haven't you seen that? And there is the Article 104 of the Constitution, which lies down the powers of the president, his authority. How can there be any limit on it? So it can be safely ignored. Then why is there an Article 130? What does that mean? He couldn't answer that. It didn't mean anything because the Constitution is not there to be taken into perspective when the government rules. Government rules without a constitution. And in fact, this is a form of government well defined by Hashem Shahabi and Juan Linz in their famous book, Sultanistic Regimes. So we have the basis of that kind of practice very well established. And in fact, the major problem here in the eyes of these people who have been propagating in lieu of the Justice and Development Party, all their spokespersons, is that how could the decision of the president be questioned? This is unfathomable, unthinkable. He represents the national will. Great. He is the nation. He is the embodiment of the nation. So he has a decree that is the national decree that represents volonté générale in the sense of Rousseau, and it has to be immediately complied with, obeyed in full. He can't debate it. And under those circumstances, Boğaziçi University seems to have done something that is unthinkable to these people. And the president is nobody ordinary in the eyes of these people. Justice and Development Party members have been telling me in the interviews that I've been conducting with them in the last 20 years or so, that the president is almost holy. If you touch him, it's equivalent to be involved in worshiping. Ibadet, they say in Turkish. So how could this person, just like a Greek god, make a decision and that there can be any kind of contestation or rebuttal of that? And of course, they need to be harshly put down for making any kind of decision, anything that they question. And then the very position of Boğaziçi University emerges as the nemesis of this regime in every sense of the term. It's too secular, too liberal, too pluralistic, too scientific in its orientation for the government to consider as acceptable. Instead, they believe that they, as representatives of the national will, have the right to carry out their program of instilling conservatism in the minds of the students who attend all graduate or undergraduate programs in the universities. Create the conservative youth of Turkey. They have to be instilled with values of nativism and ethnic nationalism. And Boğaziçi University is just the opposite of that. And therefore, their right to instill this conservative set of values give them a mission that they need to complete. And they are going to do that with the example of Boğaziçi University, and so that everybody else will fall into line and will simply follow this line very, very carefully. So to be able to do that, they have to demonize and at the same time stigmatize Boğaziçi University. How is that to be done? Well, that has to be done in the eyes of those who follow and vote for Justice and Development Party and MHP, these two political parties that have been in government. And to be able to do that, they have to create a scapegoat out of Boğaziçi University. What are the values that their supporters detest the most and are horrified with? Well, they used to be. There's a long list of them. Communism, atheism, feminism, Kurdish nationalism, and also anything that has to do with homosexuality. All of these values, some of them, any of them, any combination of them can be used with perfection to give the message that these are a group of perverts. They are simply objecting to the diktat of this godlike figure, the Greek god, the president. And they have to be crushed as quickly as possible. If that does not happen, then they have a big fear. The specter of Gezi Park, which happened in 2013, will simply crop up again and will become a major issue, and bringing a big challenge to the government. Now, this Gezi, I don't know what you have read about this, but Gezi, so far as I'm concerned, I have not made any study of that in the sense that I didn't go around asking questions to people who were around in that area at the time, but I made a lot of observations in that area, probably not very systematic. What my observations have told me, or have produced this image in my eyes, that there were all sorts of people of all ages, all walks of life coming together and talking freely in public space in Taksim. That was amazing. You know, one day I was walking through this crowd, I met a lady who was a friend of my mother-in-law, late 70s, early 80s. So what on earth are you doing here? I said, I brought some food for these kids. They're hungry, I heard. You know, this is the sort of thing Gezi was. There was a huge support for it. and coming from all walks of life. You can see people in all sorts of clothing, all sorts of ideas coming together and talking to each other. And this was undermining the message of the Justice and Development Party at the time. Because Justice and Development Party were telling their crowds that you cannot talk with them. The others are your enemies. If they come to power, you will have no future left. But they discovered at Gezi the specter, the great fear that you can talk with them, you can agree with them, and you can work with them. Could there be anything worse for this kind of government? And that is the challenge that Boğaziçi University is presenting now. I'll stop at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kayacıoğlu. That it seems I mean, your focus on the question of values and sort of some of the specificity of Boğaziçi itself and why that it therefore needs to be tamed or kept or repressed by the government, I think is extremely helpful. Let's move on then to Professor Kurişçi.
Thank you. Thank you to the organizers for bringing us together on this very painful subject. I still feel very fortunate and proud that I am a graduate of Boğaziçi University, even if Edhem and Ersin Hoca drew a picture that's not very promising about the future. I still would like to hope that there is some hope out there. I want to make just 2-3 points here, overlapping with some of what has already been said. But the first one is maybe somewhat different. What's happening to Boğaziçi and in Turkey is not unique. It's part of a phenomenon that is coming across to us from elsewhere, including the United States. The rise of ethnic nationalism, here is white nationalism, nativity, populism. There was a hefty dose of it over the last couple of years here, but also in places like Poland, Hungary, and then not to mention the events in Russia, Belarus, and even Burma, Myanmar. What this is telling us is that there is also a resistance, a pushback coming from parts of society that still advocates the values around which Boğaziçi was built and represented. Maybe what makes Boğaziçi unique is precisely what Edhem mentioned, that this is the only remaining, almost only remaining institution where these values are lived amongst students, amongst faculty, and why not also amongst people who work in the administration. I'd love to flag out the gardeners at campus, which I always loved, as well as the drivers and the security people there who truly also internalized those values. One last citadel that needs to be conquered. This uniqueness, this is my second point. This uniqueness, I think, is so painfully captured, but beautifully captured by the video that you watched. It gives me the goose pimples, and I can't resist letting go my tears there. These are la crème de la crème of Turkey, but what is important is that they come from all corners of Turkey, and they also come from households that vote for AKP and MHP itself. And their message that they feel unwanted and are not listened to is not unique to them. I think in Turkey there is a problem with the youth. The youth at large feels unwanted, unlistened, unable to participate in the public space. And that's also aggravated by job opportunity, lack of job opportunities, especially job opportunities that's not based on meritocracy, that especially hits Boğaziçi University graduates and graduates of universities in Turkey, that is recognized for the emphasis they put on merits. I need not go to the unemployment levels. They have just been announced actually for the month of October. The third point I'd like to make is that this picture is manifesting itself amongst the youth, not only Boğaziçi University youth, of a desire to exit the country. In many ways, it reminds me of Albert Hirschman's famous book, Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. They don't have a voice, and many of them don't feel a deep loyalty towards what Ersin Hocam has just described, and they're looking for an exit out of the country. Studies show that 75% of this youth, if given the opportunity, wants to leave the country. Now, my whole career studied migration. I can say that in the 60s, 70s, Turks were leaving the country to find work in Europe. 80s and 90s was more about family reunification and asylum, different kind of exit. The 2000s, interestingly, was a period of return when people came back to Turkey, but also there was immigration into Turkey. Now we're seeing that this youth wants to exit, not necessarily for career employment reason, that's important too, but just to breathe freedom, just to enjoy freedom, the kind of freedom they were able to find at Taksim Square in 2013 and always enjoyed at Boğaziçi University there. Fourth and final point, where do we go from here? It's not very promising. Mert at the very beginning pointed out how the government is very good at appealing on divisions and polarizing the country like it happens elsewhere as well. But the most recent, Baki Hocam was going to put the most recent Metropole Turkey's Pulse, January 2021, results are fascinating. Time is limited. I won't go into the details of it, but please explore it for yourself. Especially the answer to do you agree with the view universities should be independent and autonomous from politics in the management and their studies? 75% of those polled, they agree. But what is mind-boggling, if there is not some kind of statistical mistake, methodological mistake there, and Ersin Hocam can correct that, is MHP voters average is higher than the general average there. So what does this lead me to arrive at in terms of the future? Independently of what has already been said about the trends in Turkey, what boggles my mind that clearly out there is an electoral base, a public opinion that is so deeply in disagreement with what's happening to Boğaziçi University, but also what is happening to the values of that Boğaziçi University represents. I'm just hoping, that's what I learned from my professor, Üstün Ergüder, both and then as a chair, as a rector, that we must try to see what remains in the glass, and that moving forward, somehow, this inclination, this trend in the country that appears to overcome the polarization prevails. Thank you.
Voice.
Sorry. Thank you, Professor Kodici. Adding the international dimension, both in terms of some of these broader trends of authoritarianism, populism, and so on that we see around the world, but also the migration angle, the brain drain issue, which was, as you said, brought up so poignantly in that initial video, extremely important in filling out this analysis. Let us then turn to our last panelist, Professor Binaz Toprak.
Thank you. When Professor Baki Tezcan was organizing this conference, he asked me whether I would act as a joker. And I said yes, although I don't like the title Joker after seeing this film last year, Joker, which to me was kind of scary and disturbing. But I suppose a joker means to wrap things up, and that's what I'll try to do. Comment on some of the points that were already made. And I want to start and elaborate on the nature of the current regime and this populism business that Professor Kalaycıoğlu talked about by referring to a recent article I read. The author is David Landa. I think he's a political scientist, and the name of the the title of the article is Abuse of Constitutionalism. By that, he means the following. He looks at several regimes, although he doesn't really name them, and Turkey is definitely not among them, with this concept in mind, meaning abuse of constitutionalism, and looks at their constitutions, what he calls democratic-looking constitutions. Now, why are they democratic-looking? Because there's a separation of powers, there's rule of law, there is guarantee of basic rights and freedoms, there's free press, free elections, autonomous press and media, and so on. But this is only on paper, on the surface of it, he argues. In fact, in reality, all of these are thwarted by populist authoritarian leaders through a number of measures. How? For example, by appointing friendly judges or by giving them lucrative incentives, something we very well know in this country, how this works. For example, by loyalty-based appointments to the bureaucracy rather than merit. For example, by long prison sentences, long prison detentions without a guilty verdict or without even a trial. And again, we're very, very familiar with this, especially as far as political prisoners are concerned. Seizures of property, we're familiar with that as well. Total control of the media, criminalizing opponents by calling them terrorists, spies, lackeys of foreign powers, and so on. And of course, hate speech. Hate speech as well as, and I will give examples of hate speech a little bit on, as well as election fraud. Now, this is, you might think this article is about Turkey, and it's not. Like I said, it doesn't even have Turkey among the examples that he gives, but it's a photograph of Turkey, an exact replica of what Turkey is like today. A photograph of a Turkey where all institutions are under the tutelage of the president. There's no separation of powers since, at least, not that there was a serious one before, but none now exists since the 2017 referendum, which installed what in this country is called, presidential governmental system. As political scientists, we know that there is no such system, either in the literature or in the world. But this is the name of it, and it was accepted in this referendum. So no separation of powers, and all of the other characteristics that I've listed are there. Let me just give you one example of one of these characteristics, namely hate speech. Recently, when this Boğaziçi University problem came up, the leader of a far-right political party, the National Action Party, who's now in the government informally, sort of through some kind of an informal coalition with the ruling AKP, made the following statement on TV as well as in Twitter, calling students who were participating in the demonstration venomous snakes whose heads need to be crushed. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I mean, you know, we hear hate speech, terrorists. Terrorists has become an everyday word anyway, so nobody minds it. If you're called a terrorist, that really means, you know, you're an opponent. But look at this. A few days later, the dean of the Faculty of Divinity at Trakya University makes the following statement. Actually, it's not a statement, it's a threat to these university students. He says, well, we'll do our ablutions, I suppose, so that God forgives them for what they're going to do. We're going to, and by we don't know who he means, he himself and several others, I suppose. We'll go out one night, do our job, come back, and go to work in the morning. This is awful. You know, it's indescribable, but these things do happen. So it's no surprise that an institution like Boğaziçi University, with its liberal democratic tradition, should be now on the list of institutions that need to be tamed, that need to be put in their place. My second point has to do with the new rector's understanding of academia. I listened to YouTube video dating back to his rectorship at a private university prior to he was appointed to Boğaziçi, where he addresses students and faculty and talks about his vision of what a good university is about. And points out that his dream is to turn this university, meaning the university he was at, to turn this university into a place to transform it so that both the faculty and the students engage or become, becomes founders of business corporations and commercial enterprises. Now, there is this important literature, an international literature about higher education, not in Turkey, everywhere in the world, and how universities are increasingly adopting market-oriented discourse and the market-oriented outlook. The one way that they're doing it, for example, that in order to save money, they're not employing professors who will become tenured at the institution, but rather part-time academics who are paid on an hourly basis, who have no benefits, no retirement benefits, who don't have job security. They can be sort of, fired from the university at will. Their contract can be terminated at any moment. They cannot take part in the decisions of the university because they're part-time. And that large numbers of academics in many universities, have public and private universities throughout the world, are in this category. Now, what's the result? The result is that university administrations are becoming increasingly hierarchical and authoritarian rather, which perfectly fits into the picture that I earlier talked about at a larger level, at the level of Turkish politics. The final point, if I have a minute or two, I want to make is about the LGBTI community, which was an important issue in the protest against this new rector when he closed down, as my colleagues have pointed out, closed down the LGBTI club. Now, people with different sexual identities face a rampant homophobia in this country. Survey after survey has shown that these people are over 90% of the people point out that they don't want these people as their neighbors. When I was in the parliament, I gave a parliamentary motion to look into the problems of the LGBTI community, because I became aware of the immense problems that they were facing. And this parliamentary motion asked for the establishment of a parliamentary committee to look into these. Of course, it was rejected by government votes together with this other ultra-right party votes. But when you look at the problems they're facing, housing problems, because people don't want to rent to them. They can't find jobs. When they do find jobs, there is widespread bullying of these people at the job place, or termination of their contracts, as a result of which many of these people have no recourse but work as sex workers. Harassment by the police. I mean, this is unbelievable. I was quite some time ago at a meeting by a women's organization to discuss women's problems and so on, an NGO. And there were a number of 3, 4, 5 in a large audience, 3 or 5 young men. And I thought, oh, how nice, you know, rarely men are interested in these issues, and how nice they came to listen to this conference. Well, one of them gets up and talks about how when he walks on this important square of Istanbul, in Beyoğlu, Istiklal Avenue, the police when he walked, the police stopped him, asked him to go to the police station, asked him to strip down, to check his underwear, and whatever underwear he was wearing, the policeman didn't like him, so he was fined for this. And he argued that there are so many of his friends who fine for, you know, little misdemeanors, as the Turkish law calls it, like this, and that they add up, and because they can't pay, they end up in prison. So harassment by the police, violence by strangers on the street, and as well as family members, sometimes leading to murder. So this is an important issue, and nobody really deals with this issue. These people are called generally, you know, the hate speech is obviously directed against them as well, and they're called what is it? Freaks. And of course, after giving this parliamentary motion, I had my share. Freaks by these ultra-right Islamist newspapers. I had my share. They published my picture on the front page. She is protecting the freaks, but I don't mind. So this is it. And if there are other questions, you know. Oh, I also meant I wonder if I have time to Mert, because Professor Tezcan asked me to, I don't know actually whether it would be relevant, because at least people who are attending this conference from the US already know this, but I recently wrote about this episode in an interview I had with a Turkish newspaper, the episode of Edward Said and Columbia University. And Professor Tezcan thought that if I talk about this, it might be interesting. But I gave that example because I was asked the question of what difference there was between the understanding of a university in the West and the understanding in Turkey. This episode was some years ago when a picture, a photograph of Edward Said was published, a sort of symbolic photograph, not that he was actually doing it, throwing stones from the Palestinian side to the Israeli side. You know, his hand was like this with a stone on it. And this caused an uproar among some of the Columbia University, that's where he was teaching, Columbia University students, and they were protesting that they want the university administration to dismiss Professor Said. And the answer, the reaction of the university administration, as you can imagine, was that freedom of speech is always the freedom of people who think differently, even if that is unacceptable to some of the people, even if that bothers some of the people, that without freedom of speech, an institution cannot be called a university, and that the university, Columbia University administration, was certainly not even think about dismissing Professor Said. So that's it. Thank you. And we'll wait for your questions if we have time. I hope we have time for questions.
Thank you, Professor Toprak. This is, again, bringing together a lot of the different strands of the earlier presentations, I think, in terms of questions related to the autonomy, security, the corporatization of the university, as well as all kinds of the important values that we want to see in all of our universities, but certainly that have been values important to Boğaziçi over the years. I've been doing my best to collect questions. I apologize to people up front. There are many excellent questions. What Professor Tezcan and I have agreed on is that we'll ask some questions, or I'll post some questions up front. I am also going to pass along to him then the rest of the questions. I believe he's going to continue on after the 2 hours has ended. So perhaps some of these other questions can be posed and answered at that point. What I will say is that I think about half of the questions that have come in relate one way or another to what can be done and where do we go from here, and do you have hope? So they phrase these in a number of different ways. One has to do with specific actions that can be taken now, whether that's on the part of other universities. One person was interested to know what other forms of solidarity have been shown by other universities in Turkey toward what's been happening at Boğaziçi. What can be done by perhaps other members of civil society in Turkey. Also, a number of questions relate to what can be done by friends of Boğaziçi outside, whether these are former students or whether these are simply other people who are interested, very concerned with academic freedom. Are there things that aren't being done that can be done? And then also concerns that several people have expressed about, their desire to become involved, but serious concerns about what the ramifications would be either for them themselves or for their families in Turkey, because of the kinds of actions the government has taken in the past when there have been oppositional efforts and movements. So what I would do is I pose this in very general terms, these various strands of these questions. And I'd just like to go through each of our presenters. Again, I'll do it in order because I think they all have things that they can add to this, both as academics, as people who either graduated from or currently teaching at Boğaziçi. And just choose whichever strand of this complex of questions about where do we go from here that you would like to respond to. So if we could just begin with Professor Arslanalp.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the questions. Very difficult questions, especially for someone who's been, underground from day one. in a way, like our mood really oscillates from one moment to the other. So there are moments of hopefulness as well as quite a bit of despair. Moments where we feel like, you know, we are empowered, other moments where, you know, basically you feel kind of impotent in the kind of asymmetric power obviously you face with and encounter with. And in the short run, I don't think that landscape will change in any dramatic fashion. So so that power asymmetry is there. And what I think we have is not so much perhaps hope, but we have resilience, and that resilience comes from the sense of solidarity that we've been experiencing and that we've been actually nurturing in a way. It's not that, you know, obviously that reservoir of solidarity was there, but we are also actively kind of building it and trying to maintain it. And, you know, as long as we do that, I think, you know, even if in the short run, we might not have, you know, we might not change things dramatically, perhaps in the mid run, as the political context changes, we can actually build on that to preserve what we have, but also to create what we don't, and perhaps roll back some of the damage that we might encounter in the that we are in the process of, you know, encountering and experiencing in the days to come. And here I think, you know, at this point, what is really important and what has to be done, what is being done, but also, you know, perhaps further done, is to maintain this lively public opinion, right? This public opinion, this public support and solidarity from outside of the university community, maintaining it, nurturing it, making it even more visible. Because, you know, one of the, you know, obviously dangers that face us in the near future is, you know, public attention can easily move on to new topics, as it often does with these kind of, you know, moments of mobilization. So the challenge for us is, I think, to continue to maintaining this, and I think, you know, the greatest aid that those who listen to us today can do is to find ways to be present, to be visible in their support to the university. And for that, you know, it's important that we receive international support as well as domestic support, and all, you know, all channels are, I think valuable. So that's what I want to underline.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Eder?
I want to also just mention a few things. That we are getting a lot of support, and that makes us really, I mean, emotionally, and also in terms of this whole oscillation of our ups and downs. It's the kind of international solidarity that's coming in is incredibly valuable, and it's, you know, at our moments of, you know, waking up on a Saturday morning with the 2 new faculties, those pictures of solidarity coming in actually sort of mediate some of this demoralization. And I do understand that some people might actually be a little worried about being targeted. That's always, you know, that's always a possibility, and I totally understand that. But ultimately, the very nurturing of solidarity that Mert is talking about is there, and that's why, for example, there has been systematic attack on maybe 20, 30 faculty members whose names are coming up on these kind of far-right newspapers. But the next day, our professors were out there, you know, sort of putting our numbers in front of the rector's building, you know, with 250 or so faculty members, just basically saying, please learn how to count. We're not 20. So we're after this kind of sort of symbolic actions. We're trying to come up with creative ways of showing both our solidarity, but also our message. So I think we are, in terms of the symbolic side of politics, we are extremely strong. And I'm very proud to say that you know, we shouldn't be losing hope on that, knowing that we probably will not prevail, right? You know, given the asymmetry. But the symbolic side of politics here is extremely important, which is why the kind of you know, sort of peaceful protests will continue, and there is a determination. I can easily talk on behalf of my colleagues. I think here there's a, you know, determination to continue on that kind of peaceful path of protesting those decisions. Now that's the symbolic part of politics. But on the realpolitik side, the kind of work that commissions of faculty members are doing is on containment. You know, how do we contain this kind of you know, sort of appointments? How do we make sure that this kind of our old governance model now kick in so that we can actually contain and maintain the quality of faculty that's coming in. Apparently they'll come in, but there are Senate rules that actually underscore the kind of academic credentials and requirements that somebody has to meet in order to come into this university. So we're going to hang on to those principles as much as we can, and combining this both symbolic politics and this kind of containment strategy as long as we can, until we, as I like to put it, as they all scrape us out of the ground of the campus, symbolically or literally. Thank you.
Professor Ergüder?
Yes. Well, again, I'm going back to the 1980s because I like to remind my friends at Boğaziçi that we woke up one day in 1982. All the departments were rearranged. We were told that we had a very strong political science department, that we were no more political science, but we were public administration, that I was supposed to teach introduction to public administration instead of political science. So what we did really was we kept on doing well what we always did. For example, I warned my students that I was going to teach them political science, not public administration. So don't expect public administration from me, that we were thrown, that this was imposed on us. So to come back, if history is any indicator, or I would tell my friends to stick together, keep doing what they do well, keep this issue on the agenda in a very peaceful and innovative fashion. Now, when I look, I always tend to look at the positive side of things. Sometimes my friends call me a fool because of that. But I think I've never lost because I looked at the positive side of things. They don't call me a fool, they call me naive. That's a correct word. Now, for example, right now, Boğaziçi University is receiving extensively good PR, I think, in the country. People are very much interested in what is happening. It has all the seeds of being a leader when the country perhaps is moving into a new era. Now that makes me happy, also makes me sad, because in that process, it can become a scapegoat, a political scapegoat. So my friends have to be very careful about that. I'm very much impressed by the students. Their peaceful demonstration. They're innovative, very innovative. They use the social media well. They compose songs, events, and it's I think it has put the government on the wrong foot. I know that they are not getting what they expected. There is a problem on that side as well. What makes me also happy is that we've been trying to establish a network of the Boğaziçi community. Of course, what I mean by that is that organizations of alumni abroad in the United States and in Europe as well. One of the heartening things is that I'm getting so many Zoom invitations to talk about what to do about, from the alumni. They're very well organized. They're asking whether they should organize international, their international, their friends, wherever they may be, to put the Boğaziçi case on the agenda. Now, these are, I think, very good, very interesting developments. And it also points to the past success of the university. But I'm troubled with what is happening because at this point in time, the lessons we learned in 1982 may not, and the solutions we developed may not work this time around. I mean, those days are similar. Ersin would remember those days. Binnaz would remember those days. Overnight, we had a new faculty too. Faculty of Education, for example, in 1982 was established. And the university for a while treated that faculty as a stepchild. Now it's all integrated. But 1982 is not the same thing as the current situation. I don't know where they're going to put up the buildings. I don't know how this will affect the workings of the university. We just, I think, have to keep. I don't have an answer for these questions. We'll see how the cookie crumbles. But the faculty could do, and what the students could do, is really keep on pressing, keep on pressing with their demands, trying to publicize in a very peaceful fashion the problems that they are facing and what this university is all about. Now, not because I've been so much involved with Boğaziçi University, but I truly believe that it's a very positive and good example in the Turkish society. You know, we train students with that, and when they go out of the university, they're different persons. They are more democratic. They can work together with each other. It's a very valuable system of values we have at Boğaziçi, and I hope they are not destroyed. I did not say anything on what to do. I could not say really. What I could say is that stand firm, watch, and do not play the game in such a way that you can always appeal to the public opinion rather than the government, also, so on and so forth.
Thank you. Professor Atay, did you want to add something?
Yes, just a quick few words, maybe. We have to remember that even though we don't find it constitutional, the appointment of this rector is quite lawful, isn't it? I mean, nobody's going to take a step back, especially the president. And he has been, this appointed rector has been asked to step down by many people, including us as the members of the Boğaziçi University Foundation, because he's now the head of that as well. He's also the director of the Boğaziçi University Foundation. We have asked him to step down. He said it's not on his agenda. You know, he's not going to do that. He's not going to give in. People will like him in time once they get to know him. I'm not so sure, but you know, he keeps on saying this to everybody he meets. So I don't expect any great changes in the nearest future. Okay, this is a long process, and then we'll see what happens. But I know there are people grouping, and there is a number of people who are taking this to courts. I don't know how we're going to do that, but opening not just the appointment of the rector, but also the opening of the two faculties. Maybe our new faculty of law will help us do that, you know, how to close down the new faculty of law. But anyway, there might be a way out, but we have to be patient. We cannot do it overnight. Nobody is going to take a step back, and that we shouldn't either. And one other thing we should be persistent on is that we should not at any stage make the students suffer academically. We should all attend our courses. We should give our lectures. We should give our exams, whatever. You know, the students should not suffer, because once that happens, they will have everything against us. Okay, so that's all I have for time.
Thank you. Professor Eldem.
Well, I obviously have the option of saying I'm a historian, so I'll write about it when it's over, right? But then again, I don't have any concrete solution. I think solidarity and support helps a lot from inside, from outside. I think that this has to be played within legitimacy and visibility. Combining visibility and legitimacy in such a polarized environment is not easy, because what you have to say is generally much more complex than what the greater public wants to hear. So there's a mismatch, if you want, between what the public discourse and what really is at stake. But still, I think that we have to keep the higher moral ground, dignity, and that this, in the long run, will pay off at some point. I don't know when. I'm not very optimistic, and I think I gave you a sense of that earlier. But then again, I think that, as Zeynep just said, court cases, I mean, going for whatever institutions are available and might be of support, or at least might be some kind of a channel to voice our legitimate concerns and outrage. I think that's what really counts. So that would be a way. And of course, there's the mystery of what were they thinking? You know, I mean, seriously, why use such a mediocre character as a battering ram? It's really weird. What weakens the government's hand is that they are not planning this properly, and that therefore they're committing all sorts of errors in doing. And most of these errors are on the fringe of illegality or unlawfulness or illegitimate behavior. So I think we should hope that they might do a very good job, maybe a better job than us, at completely discrediting what they've done overnight. But then again, who knows? Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Karacioglu.
Well, from my earlier comments, you can easily guess. I have seen bits of this movie earlier. I come from a relatively different background. I spent a lot of time at Istanbul University. I have had my peers in undergraduate years being shot in front of me and killed in pools of blood. Today, looking back, roughly 50 years, I believe that they died in vain. What they had set out to accomplish have not materialized in Turkey. So whatever needs to be done, don't put the students in that position. I'm very pleased to see that no bloodshed has occurred, in spite of the fact that there was police brutality. And Charles Tilly has taught us from European politics that unless you have the police and the military on the scene, there is usually no bloodshed. So if the police and the military and the agents of the state can be pulled back, if that can be accomplished somehow, it will be a very major positive move. I don't know how it can be done. I don't believe that the choice of the rector was random, because we have a hyper-centralized system as this sultanistic regime works. All decisions are taken by the president's office, not necessarily by him. There are there are people in a gray area around him called the advisors. These are faceless people. We don't know many of them. There is an army of them now. We don't know their status. We don't know their upbringing. We don't know what they think. Some of them are graduates of Boğaziçi University. And some of them are not graduates of Boğaziçi University, but aspire to be graduates of Boğaziçi University, but they couldn't get the chance. So they feel revenge. Some also believe that they had deserved to be in the position of some of you. or some of us at some point in time, but they were not given a fair shake, erroneously. But that doesn't matter. They have this sense of grievance, and they're operating with that. I'm not so sure the nitty-gritty will be all decided by the president himself, but the advisors around him will be the ones who are really pulling the shots, not the rector himself. I also do not think that the rector has the capacity to resign, even if he wanted to. So asking him to resign will not necessarily materialize in anything. But circumstances change. You know, today we had the director of TÜİK, Turkish Statistics Institute, sacked. He was an immaculately managed character. Why was he sacked? I mean, who better can serve in his position? He was coming up with all the data that they wanted to see. Why did you sack him? So certain things are happening in ways us mortals cannot explain very easily. But since this is not a democratic system operating in transparency or some kind of good government, there's not enough observation for us to build on that kind of perception. But these similar incidents that occurred in the past, especially in Orta Doğu Technical University, Istanbul University, Istanbul Technical University, Yıldız Technical University, have been tragic. We had roughly about 7-8 students who passed away at Istanbul University in only one incident, right in front of us. That road should not be trekked. So the students should be somehow convinced to stay within the limits of the campus, not go out. Kadıköy incident is not a correct incident. Those incidents are the ones in which agent provocateur infiltrate extremely well and convert the whole thing to a violent confrontation with the police and authorities, an image of vandalism and violence then are imprinted on the state media and is played over and over and over again, and that degenerates the whole protest movement from its original core of peaceful protest on a rightful and legitimate claim to something else. We've seen that happen in Istanbul Technical University with the incident of throwing stones at Panam building at the entrance of Hilton. I never forget that. All those stone throwers in 1971 through 73 martial court hearings turned out to be policemen. So you have to be very careful about this. Keep it within the campus. The students should be peaceful, repeating the same message. And I support Zeynep Atay's point that classes should not be perturbed. Regular activities should continue. Research activities should continue to the extent that they could. And the students should stay away from any kind of potentially violent incident. And also pull back all these symbols of stigmatization. I would have preferred, for example, if I were in their shoes, to brandish more Turkish flags rather than LGBT flags. That would be probably, become less touchable by the police under these circumstances. And however, you have to be realistic. They did not make these moves for nothing. And they did not build a system to go into opposition. They will not leave government under any circumstance. Let's not dream about it. So if you read Shehabi's and Juan Linz's book, or the recent book on struggle for Syria by Hinnebusch and others, in which they have a similar treatment. The costs of vacating the positions that they occupy is so high that they cannot bear that cost. So under these circumstances, they'll hang on to it with their claws until the very last moment, whatever they can be. So this transition is not going to be an easy transition in Turkey. But I bank on one thing, which gives me some hope. Turkey is utterly unpredictable. We have always been so. So tomorrow, something completely different may happen, and we may find ourselves in a completely different position and talking about something completely different. I don't know. But I'm not going to bet that in the short run, there is any miraculous solution to this situation that we are in. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Karishchi.
Let me say that maybe the best thing to do is to pray for Ersin Hoca's observation about Turkey's unpredictability to unfold itself towards a promising future. I'd like to say that I agree with what has been so far. I think they've been put very eloquently. I'd just like to say that amongst them, I would second especially the ones that Zeynep put forward, the legal avenue. I appreciate amongst the participants, there might be many who would say, does it make any sense in a country where the rule of law has been shattered to the extent that it has, in a country where the government doesn't recognize the rulings of its own constitutional court? But I'd still like to think, and Edhem may correct me, there is a long tradition of the judiciary in Turkey for all its weaknesses and problems. I'd like to think that that avenue might be the most practical, the practical one to follow. Ersin Hocam's warnings are very relevant warnings. We at Boğaziçi University as students, I was there in the first half of the 70s, we were spared all that. Üstün Hoca likes underlining that. But as Üstün Hocam also mentioned, that this new generation, this youth, is so much more innovative, so much more imaginative, and I think also very much conscious of this aspect of Turkey's history, that I think they will be good at avoiding it and not falling into the kinds of traps that Ersin has rightly flagged out. The one maybe point that I'd like to make, it has to do with this international solidarity issue that has come up a number of times. I think that card, let's say, can cut both ways. In the heated polarization that Turkey is going through, and the picture that Binnaz Hoca has drawn, any association on the part of Turkish academics, Turkish students, even this particular event, advocating or suggesting any manifestation of international solidarity, especially the kind where governments become involved and express criticism or support, is inevitably going to be used for domestic political further polarization. And that has already occurred when I think the State Department spokesperson about two weeks ago made references to Boğaziçi University and the event surrounding it, And immediately reactions came. And maybe the most telling reaction was that the US should get its own democracy in order before advocating any criticism or advice of any kind to Turkey. There is the risk of students and others being, you know, we've mentioned how terrorism has become banalized. That's not the case, of course, with LGBT and then the other hate terms. But another one that I think is becoming banalized is accusations of being traitors. I don't know how effective a term it remains today. Now, having said that, there was a period back from the mid-1990s onwards into the 2000s, where especially the EU and the United States did play a very constructive, positive role in edging Turkey towards reforms. And it's so ironic that it was the AKP government that permitted LGBT parades in Istanbul in, I can't remember the exact year, 2003 or 2004. That's very telling, very interesting in terms of the positive role that the international community can play. Could that be repeated? Very difficult to tell. We've already discussed how a different world, not just Turkey, a world we're living in. But there are lessons to be drawn from there. And one of the lessons is, I think it was very unfortunate and very hurtful that the European Union let go of Turkey way before Turkey began to drift away from the values that the EU had so very much advocated for Turkey. I don't need to go into the details of it, but it started as soon as Nicolas Sarkozy became a president of France, and we can trace the details of it. The drift away from those democratic values, I think, in Turkey started after the European Union's culturalist arguments came forward. So I'm not very sure what can be expected from the international community. Nevertheless, academic solidarity among students, I would still value. It is happening. It was mentioned in the opening parts of this panel, the way in which MESA has come up with its letters. I'd like to think that maybe even in a very small manner, it does make a difference. My final point in this context is, please do go, I don't want to sound like an advocate of Metropole, but do go and have a look at the most recent Turkey's Pulse's results of how the Turkish public in the last 2-3 years, since 2018, has started again to support the idea of EU membership. Of course, everybody recognizes that we are not where we were 15, 20 years ago. But I think by supporting the EU, the public is still sending a message, and that includes also AKP and MHP voters, as well as what I said earlier on about the youth wanting to go out. But what I didn't point out when you look at the poll results is that they don't want to go to Russia. They don't want to go to China. They don't want to go to the Gulf. They certainly don't want to go to Saudi Arabia. They want to go to Europe, basically to the West, because that's where they find those values that I think the most recent percentage is 58% of the Turkish public prefers or wishes to see when they say that Turkey should be a member of the European Union there. I hope I earned my title as the chair of Jean Monnet. That was I was granted more than 20 years ago, and that's all I can reflect on this tough question of how to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last on this question to Professor Toprak.
Thank you. Actually, almost everything has been said, but I'd like to pick up where Kemal left about the international community. He works on IR, in the IR area, international relations area. I'm not an IR person, but I more or less know the comparative politics literature. And in comparative politics literature, there has been this theory for a long time now that going back and forth between authoritarian versus democratic governments, as far as various countries in the world scene are concerned, depends on what happens in some of the core countries, the important countries in the world. And political scientists have been talking about, for example, comparative political scientists have been talking about waves of democracy. In other words, periods where so many countries in the world turned democratic because something happened towards democracy in these core countries. For example, right after the collapse of empires after the First World War, including our own empire, Ottoman Empire, you had a wave of the democratic governments. Then after the Second World War, well, prior to that, a wave of authoritarian fascist governments throughout Europe, in Spain, in Portugal, but in other countries in Europe, in Germany, of course, and Italy, and so on. But that after the Second World War, there was again this wave, and it's then in 1946 that Turkey made this transition to democracy, this wave of them. And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union and so on. Now I think, what Kemal was talking about earlier about Trump and how it's not only Erdoğan here in Turkey, but Trump in the US to some extent, but Orban in Hungary, and Poland is another example, Russia another, and several Latin American countries of these populist authoritarian leaders being in power. Now, the fact that a major country like the US has flipped over, that is no longer Trump, but Biden in power now, might really, that's my expectation that it might make a difference. And I would agree with Kemal that international pressure does indeed or can indeed play a very positive role, as the example he gave. But let me give another example. For example, when Turkey was hoping to start negotiations with the European Union, one demand of the EU was that, among others, was that Turkey democratize, and among others, to get rid of, to annul capital punishment, because that doesn't exist in any country of Europe, of the European Union. Now, in government was this political party that I earlier talked about, this extra nationalist, ultra-nationalist, National Action Party. He was in government, in a coalition at the time. And even though under normal circumstances, there would be no way that this party would vote to get rid of capital punishment, that's what happened. And since then, we no longer have it. So I'm hopeful that this kind of a change might happen in Turkey, and that international pressure at governmental levels will work. What to do in the meantime? I mean, I would agree with everything that's been said. The rector has said he's not going to resign. And again, I agree with Ersin that even if he wanted to resign, he can't because the president won't let him. And the president isn't going to change his mind. So here to stay for at least 4 years, which is the tenure of rectors in this country, 4 years. Now, neither the faculty nor the students can keep up this protest for 4 years. And the rector knows it. He said, well, I give them 6 months. I'm not sure it can even last 6 months. I mean, the formal protest, meaning turning their backs to the rectorate building or protesting on the lawn and so on. But what they could do, they can't, you can't keep it up for 4 years. It's impossible. But what you could do is pass a resistance, something that Üstün was talking about, that we did in a sense after the 1980 coup, when Boğaziçi University was under attack by this new institution installed by the military called YÖK, the Higher Educational Council. They would tell us to teach courses, and then we just go, in class, we'd just go ahead and teach whatever we wanted to teach. The name of the course might have been something else, but it didn't matter. We didn't teach Marx for a while, or Marxism, or talk about Soviet Union, but that was no big loss. So that, these kids learned it for 2 years. After 2 years, when the system opened up, they learned it anyway. We sort of hid the books on Marxism and on left movements and so on, so that, when gendarmerie came into the offices to look at the forbidden books, they wouldn't be there. But we survived, and we survived keeping our traditions. I think that's what they should do. I think, they should just keep on teaching, as Zeynep suggested. And I expect that that's what the faculty would do, because I can't imagine Boğaziçi University faculty punishing the students by not attending courses, by not giving lectures or not attending their seminars and so on. They wouldn't do that, because the faculty at Boğaziçi has this work ethic, which I know about. People are there during holidays. People are there when it snows and it's very difficult to get up that hill. People are there even when they're sick, and I know from myself that this is what I did and what so many of my colleagues did. So they're not going to leave what they have to do aside as far as teaching goes. But I think this rector will soon find that it's very, very difficult for him to govern this university. The moment that he decides to take to make a decision like the one he did about closing off the LGBT club or calling the police to the campus, that these protests will start again, and that he'll have to deal with them for a long time, one more time. So I think he's going to be careful in terms of, the steps he's going to take. And I'm hopeful that by 1923, as Kemal was saying about these public polls, and I look at them, I read them. I mean, all polls show that that both the present president is going to lose, as well as his party, as well as the MHP and so on, and that there is quite a chance for the opposition, if opposition forces can get together. Now, I wouldn't bet on the opposition, despite the fact that I was a member of the major opposition party in parliament. but I wouldn't bet on what they would do. But I think eventually, if for nothing else, for the economy, for the fact that so many people are suffering from the economy, for the fact that this government does not see the relationship between rule of law and between democratic procedures and the economy, that they don't see it at all, and so on, eventually is going to be the economy that's going to end up with the present governments losing the elections. So I'm hopeful. I mean, 2 more years, you just duck. You just duck, and like I said, engage in passive resistance, and 2 more years, hopefully they'll be gone.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I think Professor Eder had a quick comment that she wanted to make before we close out this part.
Okay, just a quick comment on Binnaz Hoca. Just rest assured that none of the faculty members have actually stopped teaching. We're completing our semester, and I'm in the middle of grading at the moment. So, and that's likely to remain as is. And then on the idea of how long this can go, there are 350 faculty members that are meeting every Sunday on forums, and we're continuously thinking about creative ways of peaceful protests. So rest assured that those peaceful protests, one way or the other, whether it is continuing on the symbolic line, is going to continue, whether it takes 2 years, 3 years, 4 years until his term is up. The third thing is on my real short point was on international pressure. What can be done? It's about institutional letters. Just a pragmatic suggestion: institutional letters to the rector, institutional letters to higher education council, because they still require that legitimacy. They still value that international appearance. We're collaborating with so many institutions, and institutional letters evade or circumvent the problem of names, because we're as this University of California, Davis, are concerned about academic freedom and institutional autonomy. I think those kind of pressure points at more macro level on higher education council, or the rector Melih Bulu himself, is going to shuffle some feathers. And I'm just making a pragmatic suggestion from my colleagues, international colleagues on this front. At the macro level, I don't know how that plays, but at this level, it certainly plays into that legitimacy.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave the session. I have, for those of you who have posed other questions, and there have been many of them, I've passed them along to Professor Tezcan. I know he's going to continue for a while after this. I just want to thank all of the panelists for some just wonderfully rich presentations, and thank you also for your very thoughtful responses to this complex of questions that I posed to launch the question and answer period at the end. It's really been my honor to be with you today, and for those of us who work with MESA and work with the Committee on Academic Freedom, we'll continue to do our best to express our solidarity in ways that you all find most appropriate to help you. So I leave you with that, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much. Thank you so much for joining us and taking more time than you actually were going to. We are already at 2.5 hours, and probably many of the panelists are very tired. I'm not quite sure whether we can really go on, but there are some questions, and actually many. And with those panelists who can stay a little longer, maybe we could address a few of them. I was thinking of taking a short break by showing you a video that was by the students. And before I leave for that video, maybe I could read some of these questions, and then maybe a panel. I mean, I would urge you, beg you to keep the answers as short as possible. But I thought one interesting question was here. Let me read it to you. My question is to Kemal Kirişçi and Ethem Eldem. The rise of nativism, nationalism, and illiberal rule in the West is explained with the concept of elite failure. That's the failure of liberal elites in bringing good governance and ensuring economic prosperity, social justice, and equity. What role do you think elite failure played in the Turkish democratic backsliding? And then this question goes on, what can be done in a country which never had liberal elites in the Western sense to begin with? And then a question that came up that was somewhat parallel to this was, it was posed in the sense of such appointments were made to other universities as well recently, but there was no such heavy responses and reactions. Now this is happening through Boğaziçi. Maybe we need to critically think about this. Why don't we make a big deal when this happens to 100. Yıl Üniversitesi, but we make such a big deal when it happens to Boğaziçi. So being a little self-critical perhaps. And then there was another question that perhaps the questioner would like to ask herself, sort of in response to some of the points raised earlier. While the panelists, those of you who can stay, I'm not asking you to stay, can think about these, I'm just going to show a short video. One of the, actually there are quite a few of them. One of the student videos, the one I thought of that would really be right for the moment, where we talked about legality. There was one about how certain things are legal. Oh, let's see. That is it, I think. Okay.
Evet, rektör ataması yasal ama gece 3'te Merkez Bankası Başkanı'nı görevden almak da yasal.
Evet, rektör atamaları yasal ama kadın cinayetlerinde failler takım elbise giydiği için ihale indirimi vermek de yasal.
Evet, rektör ataması yasal ama ormanları maden inşaatına açmak da yasal.
Evet, rektör ataması yasal ama pandemi döneminde belediyelerin yardım kampanyalarını engellemek de yasal.
Evet, rektör ataması yasal ama kullanılmayan otoyollara ve köprülere geçiş garantisi vermek de yasal.
Evet, rektörün atanması yasal ama aynı zamanda devlet kurumlarına akrabaların doldurulması da yasal.
Evet, rektör ataması yasal ama 31 Mart İstanbul Belediye seçimini iptal etmek de yasal.
Evet, rektör ataması yasal ama milyon dolarlar harcayıp makam araçları almak da yasal.
Evet, rektör atamak yasal ama 750 milyon dolarlık arka parkı yaptırmak da yasal.
Evet, rektör ataması yasal ama devlet ihalelerinin hepsini aynı 5 şirkete vermek de yasal.
You can see other videos by Pulse 302, if I cannot show them all today, on their Twitter account. They post them there. For those of you who don't speak Turkish or understand Turkish, this particular one was on the question of legality. Turkish government makes the argument that, well, you know, the president has this authority. So they made a video of showing, yes, this is legal, but then look at what other things are happening that appear to be legal. And there were a number of corruption issues. There were a number of things related to targeting women, sexual assault, and things of that sort, which is kind of the summary being, we live in Turkey in a regime that is legal and is using legality to actually grow authoritarian practices. Now I'm going to ask to Kemal Bey and Ethem Bey to address the question of elite failure. Can we talk about something like this? Was there ever an elite in the Western sense in Turkey? Whoever would like to go first.
I'll give it a crack. I'm sure Ethem will fill in the blanks and do a better job. The elite failure question is a tough question, and it probably is a question that deserves an event on its own. What I can say, without taking too much time, that in the US, here in Washington, D.C., there has been a lot of soul searching about it. And that soul searching has manifested itself in the Biden administration's policy outlines. What brought Trump to power and what enabled Trump to mobilize such a large base of support that persists. And there's a lot of argument how Trump may have been gone, but Trumpism continues, is the way in which his electoral base has been disadvantaged by so-called globalization. You know, I have to take cut it very short. The middle class has been affected by it. The working class has been affected by it. This notion that jobs have gone abroad has very much helped this line of argument. And Trump has been very good at putting the blame on what Washington, D.C. represents. In other words, the elite and the big companies. What's happening, or what happened during the campaign, and you've all watched it, is the way in which the left wing of the Democratic Party has brought these issues up, and it is manifesting itself in the priorities of American foreign policy, the way in which there's pretty much a consensus that this administration is not going to go back to the notion of free trade. The emphasis is on fair trade. The TTIP that was advocated only 5-6 years ago has completely been deserted. So we are seeing elements of adjustment to what the Trump side attributed to elite failure by advocating this notion of an international liberal order in which the free trade aspect was very important to it. There is, of course, a grand literature that analyzes all these things, but for the benefit of time, I refrain going into the details of it. The second part of the question concerns Turkey. It's a very good question. Again, I wish there was time to go into the details of it. I agree with the observation that the Turkish elite, maybe with the exception of, again, starting from the mid-90s into the 2000s, was always associated with a very authoritarian view of politics. Authoritarianism has always been part and parcel of Turkish political culture, but that did change. We saw it in academia. We saw it, if you'd like to include upper echelons of civil society into this very broad definition of elite. We saw it in at least one part of the business world, who strongly advocated from, again, the mid-90s onwards, the notion advocated in support of liberal democratic values, the rule of law, etc., recognizing the strong relationship between those values and a well-performing economy. Those were also the years when the public at large, we have to recognize, benefited. Poverty took a nosedive in Turkey, whereas it's making a vicious comeback in a brutal way as Turkey departs or drifts away from these values. So very shortly, I think the topic is a very complicated one, but very good two questions in the context of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Kemal Hocam. Ethem Hocam, would you have something to say on the question of elite failure?
Other than agreeing with Kemal Kirişçi, yes. Briefly, I think that in the case of Turkey, it's difficult to talk about an elite that has failed. I mean, to fail, you have to have an elite, and I'm not sure there's anything that really corresponds to the kind of elites that you can find in the West. But I think the real divide in Turkey has been around this vague definition of the white Turks. I think that's really what has triggered much of the populism on which the AKP has built its populist appeal. That combined with Islam, and Islam ever since the 1950s is kind of, the main factor in an opposition against Kemalism. So I think it's really around those concepts and notions that the rise of populism can be explained in Turkey. And what's problematic in the long run is that underlying all this, you have some kind of a common ground of nationalism, which includes the opposition too. And it becomes very difficult. For example, this is something you see every day in Turkish politics. It becomes more and more difficult for the opposition to say anything different from the government when it comes to international politics, including, you know, the attitude of Western leaders and whatever. And that is why I do not agree with Ersin Bey's proposal to see Turkish flags waved by our students. I don't think that's really, because if you start that, if you take that road, I mean, it's the road that leads to hell, quote unquote, because it's the road that is some kind of a consensual road. You are trying to ingratiate the government, and that's extremely dangerous, especially since in a country that is so homophobic and transphobic. I mean, to see that LGBT becomes this focus of hatred, to dismiss LGBT flags is, I think, a major error. I mean, I agree with Ersin Bey's suggestion that we should try to have as little divisive action on campus for our students and whatever, but I don't think we can call that divisive, because it is about human rights, it's about individual rights, and therefore I think it should not be put in the same category of the matters that divide and provide some kind of fodder for the hatred of the other side. So that's, again, I think one of the problems of Turkish politics, that there is such a large consensus around national values that they need to be avoided if you really want to make a point about what you're talking about. And this I will use as an occasion to say that the major advantage we have is that we're talking about something that cuts across the traditional divides in Turkish society. We're talking about something that involves an institution and that could involve and has involved last year Şehir University, which was closed down by governmental presidential decree, and which was a university strongly located in the on the Muslim side of the institution. Any kind of grouping of students, of individuals, regardless of their political stand on the traditional political divide, I think that we would have, and I think we have already made an inroad into really making a point about what this is all about. It's very difficult because on the other side, you have this smear campaign. I mean, the press is going to use every occasion to turn what you are saying into something that is completely unrelated, but which for the public has some kind of a meaning. But I think that's really what we have to concentrate on. The fact that we're talking about something that is crucial to every individual in this society who respects the simple concept of being free in his, her mind, and to be able to live their life as they wish in this country. So if we can get that through, I think we'll move. That partly answers the question about other universities, because it's true that, you know, other universities, but we see now that some universities, and the problem is that there are, I think, over 200 state universities in Turkey, which is ridiculous. I mean, 90% of those universities are glorified high schools, right? Or not even that. So for those universities that really have some kind of a character as a university, I think that this, what's happening in Boğaziçi is making people, students and faculty, think about what's happening and how important this is for their. So I would expect solidarity and the possibility of transfusing some blood into those institutions.
May I also jump in here?
Buyurun, yes, please. But try to keep it short so that we can there's one more question before 12 noon.
I totally agree that it's very difficult to define who the elite are in Turkey. We don't have an aristocracy. Therefore, we can't argue that there is some sort of upper class by birth or something. We had not inherited that. If I recall Halil İnalcık's famous statement in the 1963 book, Comparing Turkey and Japan, he argued that there are two classes in the Ottoman Empire. One class that ruled, he called that class askeri, should be literally translated as the military, but the ruling class. And the other, who actually toiled the fields of the country, who earned their living, who paid taxes, who also was used as cannon fodder in war, reaya, two classes. We have the likes of that today also, no middle class. So who on earth were these elites? Probably the military and the judiciary, probably. Although they're now gone. And we are now arguing in a book that Ali Charkol and myself have produced, which will be out in April by University of Michigan Press on voting behavior. Center periphery is gone. Therefore, this upper class, if there ever were, is gone. But to answer your question, it's the military who failed dismally. İlker Başbuğ has a very recent book published. Those of you who can speak and also read Turkish should have a look at the book, where he gives you, from the perspective of a ex-chief of staff, his career, what happened between 1950s all the way to the 1980s, and how the military moved to open up a big space for the Sufi orders in Turkey, tariqat movements and Jamaat, etc., to take hold and to have inroads. He has all these about Gülen movement, about others, and how the military played critically, especially since the 12th of March, 1971 military coup. And it's been very systematic. So they were the ones who actually betrayed Kemalism, if there is a betrayal. And they were the ones who opted for this kind of resurgence of the Islamist movement, which had taken root about a century earlier, if we are to accept Tarık Zafer Tunayaz's book on İslamcılık Ceryanı as a major movement occurring from 1850s up until the beginning of the Republican era. So rekindled it, knowingly or unknowingly. And there are some international influences on it, all the way from Eisenhower's administration, John Foster Dulles' idea of dealing with secular nationalism by using religious nationalism, which US seemed to have been very carefully manufacturing in the Buddhist Indochina, and then in Indonesia, Latin America, also in the Middle East, and Turkey seems to be one of those major fronts. So that is something that has to be studied more carefully. But that's one. Number two is another book by Orhan Gazi Ertekin. And that book is on the, it gives you an account of what happened in 2010. On the 12th of September 2010, we had a referendum, and how the top-level judges in Turkey performed in that referendum. I will tell you in Turkish the subtitle of the book. Yargının eşekli demokrasiyle imtihanı. Okay, and that gives you an understanding of what it is, because he argues that they were discussing about what to do in this referendum, in the post-referendum, in electing top-level judges for the Judges and Prosecutors Council, or Supreme Council. Then now it's no longer Supreme for some reason. It was taken out in 2017, the title Supreme. Probably they weren't doing things that were supreme, so it was not realized. Anyway, in those elections, one of the very high-ranked judges in the highest appellate court, or the Supreme Court in Turkey, Yargıtay, appeared and said, even if the ministry feels a candidate a donkey, I will vote for it. Okay, this is a judge, first level, graduate of a law school. Lovely. If this is the standard by which you operate, I'm not surprised where we end up under these circumstances. So both of them actually did not even engage with this challenge that came from the Justice and Development Party. They just imploded and caved in. So the Turkish elite actually misperformed tremendously.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm cutting you because before I want to ask another question to clarify a little bit. The one about, you know, what happens when at other universities things happen. Since the American audience doesn't quite know, are there institutions like, let's say, MESA's Committee on Academic Freedom, or professional institutions in Turkey that put a stand when such things happen? Or did they? For instance, what happened in Boğaziçi when in 2016 there was, I think, a precedence to where we are now, when a university president whom I respect probably more than any other university president in Turkey at the time in 2016, Professor Barbarosoğlu, she went and protected her faculty during an investigation. She was the only one in the whole country to do that. And then I believe she was supposed to become the next president, but then that's not what followed. So if we could comment on that a little bit, how that happened, and what kind of associations, organizations are there to put resistance to such moments, it would be very helpful. But while you're thinking, and I'm wondering whether Mert or Mine Hocalar could speak to this, I'm going to show one more video, if you don't mind, that came up with the question of the artwork and LGBT question. I think it's a beautiful video that everybody should see. Let's see whether I can manage this right from here.
Evet, rektör ataması yasal.
Oh, this one.
Bu eserin değerlerime aykırı olduğunu düşünüyorum. Bu düşüncemi okul ortamında dile getirdim. Homofobik söylemler yargılanmıyorken bu arkadaşlarımın tutuklanmasını adaletsizlik olarak görüyorum. Öğrencilerin kimlikleri üzerinden şeytanlaştırılmasını ve tutuklanmasını kabul etmiyorum.
Okulumda Müslüman kimliğini özgürce yaşayabilen biri olarak sanat eserini fikir özgürlüğü olarak tanımlıyorum. Kutsal değerlerimin sanat eserinde kullanılan imgelerle zedelendiğini düşünüyorum. Okul öğrencilerinin kimlikleri üzerinden şeytanlaştırılmasını ve tutuklanmasını kabul etmiyorum.
Sanatın eleştirel bir rolü olduğunu düşünüyorum. Hakim kimliğin hassasiyetleriyle azınlık gruplarının ötekileştirilmesinin aynı olmadığını düşünüyorum. Okul öğrencilerinin kimlikleri üzerinden şeytanlaştırılmasına ve tutuklanmasına kabul etmiyorum.
Sanat eserinin kutsalımla örtüşmediğini düşünüyorum. Kutsalım üzerinden tutuklamalara meşruiyet kazandırılmasına karşıyım. Okul öğrencilerinin kimlikleri üzerinden şeytanlaştırılmalarına ve tutuklanmalarına kabul etmiyorum.
Ortak bir demokrasi mücadelesi verilirken farklı kimliklerin hassasiyetlerinin gözetilmesi gerektiğini düşünüyorum. Ben inanan bir insanım ve bu resmi doğru bulmuyorum. Diğer inanan insanların da nefret suçu işlemeden inançlarını, rahatsızlıklarını ve kızgınlıklarını dile getirebileceğini düşünüyorum. Okul öğrencilerinin kimlikleri üzerinden şeytanlaştırılmasını ve tutuklanmasını kabul etmiyorum.
Herhangi bir sanat eserinin değerler üzerinden tartışılmaması gerektiğini düşünüyorum. Sanat eserleri gücünü eleştirel bakış açısından ve özgürlükten alır. Okul arkadaşlarımın kimlikleri üzerinden şeytanlaştırılmasını ve tutuklanmasını kabul etmiyorum.
Ben sanatsal ifadenin özgür kalması gerektiğini düşünüyorum. Rahatsızlıkların okul içerisinde dile getirilmesini doğal karşılıyorum. Ancak arkadaşlarımın dışarıdan hedef gösterilmesine karşıyım. Okul arkadaşlarımın kimlikleri üzerinden şeytanlaştırılmasını ve tutuklanmalarını kabul etmiyorum.
Kutsalımın sanat eserinde o şekilde kullanılması beni rahatsız etti.
hassasiyetlerimin gözetilmesini istiyorum. Ancak bunun yolunun devletin topyekun bir şekilde harekete geçip tutuklamalar yapmasını doğru bulmuyorum. Arkadaşlarımın kimlikleri üzerinden şeytanlaştırılmasını ve tutuklamaları kabul etmiyorum.
Arkadaşlarımız serbest bırakılsın.
Melih Bulu istifa etsin.
Arkadaşlarımız serbest bırakılsın.
Melih Bulu istifa etsin.
Arkadaşlarımız serbest bırakılsın.
Melih Bulu istifa etsin.
Melih Bulu istifa etsin.
Arkadaşlarımız serbest bırakılsın.
All right. A last round of answers on that question of, general association, organizational skills, resistance to previous moments, where it failed. Is there anything we could learn, etc.? Please, whoever would like to go first.
Actually, could I say something?
Please.
Because I feel as if I have to say something because I was the vice rector of both Gülay Barbarosoğlu and the next rector, Mehmet Özkan. So I worked with both of them. So I went through the transition. So I think probably I lived through the whole thing. I know my colleagues will tell you slightly different stories, but maybe I should, if they want to start off, that's all right. I'd like to say a few words after them if they want. Because you asked me ne eder and Mert.
By all means, Zeynep Hocam, by all means.
Okay, let me just very quickly say that Gülay Barbarosoğlu was elected by the faculty members. A very large percentage of the votes went to her, and there was no doubt about we were pretty sure that she was going to be appointed. But don't forget, the elections were on the 12th of July, and there was a coup attempt on the 15th of July. So everything came to a halt in Turkey. Life stopped, the appointments stopped, the universities closed down. It was a time of chaos. It was a time of emergency. And we were expecting an appointment, a new rector appointment at the beginning of August, and it didn't come. So we started waiting, and the vice rectors of Gülay Barbarosoğlu, she had to carry on. When, even if there hadn't been another appointment, the previous rector carries on. So she was waiting, and I became one of the vice rectors, and Mehmet Özkan became one of the other vice rectors at the time. So we started working with her, and Mehmet Özkan had been he had been working in the election campaign of Gülay Barbarosoğlu. So there was no way he himself could have been a candidate during the elections beforehand. But anyway, it turned out towards the end of October or beginning of November that Gülay Barbarosoğlu was not going to be appointed. So they started, the Higher Education Council asked her for names. And I believe, well, we know this, but, I still would like to, I think she gave more than one name. I think she gave a couple of her vice rectors' names to Higher Education Council, one of them being Mehmet Özkan. So he was the next appointed rector. But it was a time of emergency. And the whole thing, I have to say, is that we were a team. So Gülay Barbarosoğlu was out of the picture, but the rest of us stayed with him, the same group. One of the advisors director became the vice rector. So three of us stayed on with him. We gave him support because we were the same team. And as far as I was concerned, he was one of us. He was our friend. We just had to carry the boat through, disturbed times, desperate times. So I'm happy I've done this, but it's not quite the same thing for me at the moment. We're dealing with an outsider. So this is how I'd like it to be seen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I didn't mean to ask simply on that question. I also wanted to see whether there are other ways of sort of working with other universities under such things. So anybody who could say a few things on this, because if people ask, I'd be very happy to hear. Mine Hocam, Mert Hocam, anyone else?
Do you want to go ahead, Mert?
You may go ahead, and I'll
continue afterwards.
A couple of things. Obviously, the kind of emergency that we were having in the aftermath of the coup, when all our colleagues are being purged literally across the board by decrees for just because they were just dissenting. So this was a totally different political environment, and I also want to underline that we did protest the appointment of Mehmet Hoca as well, both the faculty and the students. But yet Mehmet Hoca made something remarkable and came out openly and said, look, these are the conditions under which I have actually agreed to this job. And if you want me to resign, I will resign. But I will keep on the red lines. I will keep on the sort of the institutional integrity of this institution. And in fact, that's when the faculty actually agreed. And that's with despite the protests, continuing protests of some of the students. I mean, some of the students will turn their backs on the graduation, and there were a lot of protests, continuing protests and discontent with that as well. So I want to give that context that we did actually oppose that appointment as well. Now, in terms of, but as I said, and to my knowledge, the Mehmet Hoca has never overridden any of the commission's decisions, any of the Senate and the executive board decisions, and have played by this kind of university governance model. Having said, despite, again, continuing criticisms from the students, and some of them rightly so. The second question I want to say on the alliances of the universities, I mean, now, everybody here has been talking about the democratic decline, if not the breakdown of the country. And this is, it's very hard to voice opinions, especially in this kind of a context of democratic decline. And that's unfortunately has been the case. And in some ways, this is what's interesting right now, that Boğaziçi has actually become has offered a political space somehow for that kind of dissent, legitimate dissent, to come out. However, that's also scary for the government, and hence the whole sort of the fear that's being triggered on this is the second Gezi Park, etc. Now, the problem obviously is this threat of polarization, right? No matter what you try, you might be disturbing somebody's sensibilities, and that sensibility will then fall into these classic fault lines, and then you'll be pigeonholed and you'll be drawn into this kind of polarization game. And that, I think, is what we need to be very careful about here. And that's a very thin line to thread, primarily because we have to remain focused on the issue of institutional autonomy, and on the issue that this is institutional integrity that we're talking about. Now, in terms of alliances, as I said, there are a lot of new voices. Even high schools are now coming out and protesting and showing their sort of alliance with Boğaziçi University, which is very new. But ironically, those high schools have also suffered from their elimination of their headmasters a couple of years ago, continuously. So this has gone down now, and this is just a sort of an ongoing process of quality battle, in fact, of those institutions trying to maintain their integrity. Now, on how much alliance we were able to show with other universities, as I said, given the limitations and the overall silencing effect of the political environment, I think that was limited in self-criticism. I would acknowledge that, but I think this is now a new opportunity for building new alliances and literally bring out the kind of institutional reform we would like to bring about. And it's not about elections. I want to underline that. Elections are not necessarily the best way to choose a rector. And in some places, in some universities, we know that elections have created disastrous outcomes, with the elected rector, purging all of the ones that have voted for the other candidate, right? We've been claiming that this is not how it's worked in Boğaziçi University. We've actually come with a consensus, have created, involved a lot of the stakeholders in the process, and have created our own model in some ways that's been working for Boğaziçi. It's not likely to work, or it may not work for other universities, which is why we need to come up with different venues, different mechanisms, and different discussions on how universities should be governed. And that should be done with other universities, along with the other universities. And I think this is a great opportunity for that kind of discussion to start. Sorry, I went on too long.
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Let me add, may I add just something?
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I wanted to, give a chance to say a few things for those who didn't get a chance to say anything in the last round. So they are Binnaz Hoca and Mert Hoca, and I believe also who else didn't? Üstün Hoca. Yes, Üstün Ergüler didn't get a second round either. So Üstün Bey.
Okay, mine is a short comment.
Please go ahead, Binnaz Hocam.
Mine is a short comment about solidarity and sport between the various institutions. Mine has explained the solidarity between various universities as well as even high schools and so on. But there has been, in the case of Boğaziçi, and that's true of other issues as well, outside of Boğaziçi, other issues of human rights and freedoms and so on. In the case of Boğaziçi, there has been great support on the part of alternative media that functions on the internet. In other words, they're not on the regular established channels on TV or radio, but they broadcast alternatively on the internet. They gave quite a bit of support, program after program each night about Boğaziçi and about the plight of educational institutions in general, as well as rather than platforms, what I would call citizen, rather than NGOs, what I would call citizen platforms. In other words, people like-minded people getting together, meeting regularly, discussing some of the problems that appear on the agenda, and then all they can do, unfortunately, is publish statements against it. But that too is important because it's better than the whole population being silent about what's going on. And of course, a lot of people do this by sort of taking risks in a way. There are also NGOs, and this is throughout the country. I mean, ecology groups, for example, protesting against something or another, about a new plant in a village, in their neighborhood. Human rights groups, groups that deal with rights and liberties and freedoms and so on. So despite despite what I said earlier, and despite the nature of the regime, there's great resistance. One of these NGOs, for example, the women's NGOs are incredible. The government doesn't know how to deal with them. These young women are on the streets, thousands of them. And whenever they choose to protest because something or another happened concerning women, including, for example, murder of women, which has increased in recent years, they'll be beaten by the police, they'll be taken into custody, but no matter, they just will go on the next time to protest again. So that, I think people who are listening to what we've been talking about and who don't know much about Turkey should not really think that all is quiet, that nobody has the chance to protest, that nobody can get together and show solidarity. That's not true. And I think, for example, LGBTI groups as well, or NGOs, they're quite active. And again, on honor marches, for example, even though they're beaten up, they still go and do it. The picture isn't that bleak, and there is quite a bit of cooperation among many of these platforms so that they come together and form an opposition front in addition to opposition political parties and so on, and at the same time force these political parties for change, for taking up more courageous stands and so on.
Thank you, Binnaz Hocam. And I now realize I failed to give a brief summary in English of the video that I showed. Because you just mentioned it and I remembered there are so many people who would probably not understand what the video was about. At the very beginning, we talked about a piece of art that produced some discussions and then the targeting of LGBT clubs. So the video that I just showed was related to that. As you could see what Boğaziçi students were saying, some of them found the image, well, offensive, but they said, I think I can express this on campus. I'm really against police coming in, arresting my friends for this. I am really against the media targeting this. So that was a very clear point how subtle and nuanced Boğaziçi students are. Some of them find that and celebrate that piece of art. Some of them are offended by it, but they think they can express that feeling of offense on campus in dialogue. They are all against the media targeting the students. So that was a very good video. And now I'm going to ask Üstün Bey.
Could I ask one thing, add one other example to what you said? This is a religious young woman covered, a Boğaziçi University student who was taken into custody. And when they came out, reporters asked about her feelings, and she was saying, well, until now, as a covered woman, she asked not only about her feelings, but about how she felt about the LGBTI club and so on. And she said, well, she thought she experienced otherization throughout her life. But at Boğaziçi, she realized that there are other people, other groups of people, such as people with different sexual identities who have also experienced the same thing that she experienced. And she was saying that one of her best friends are gays, for example, that they can discuss issues together and so on. This is, I think, an incredible example of, like you said, how sophisticated these students are. And
Thank you.
How liberal-minded they are.
I'm going to let Üstün Bey say a few things too, because he didn't get a chance to respond to any of the questions I asked in this last bit. Üstün Bey, would you have anything to say? I think you have a lot of experience with European Universities Association, and I believe you were also involved with their academic freedom, or maybe you were one of the founders of that wing of them. Has there been sort of like a work to carry that into Turkey to create a network that really stands for academic freedom, or anything else you would like to say? A few minutes, please.
In a few minutes, I'll try to be very, very brief. Those were the good days, they're gone. I mean, the 90s and the early 2000s, when we were quite active in the European forums of higher education. One was European University Association. My predecessor was a member of the executive committee. I was very active in their quality evaluation process. In fact, I was one of the founders of their quality evaluation process. Gülay Barbarasoğlu was a member of the executive committee of EUA. And I was also the chair of the Magna Carta Observatory of Academic Freedom and Institutional Autonomy, which is centered in Bologna, Italy, which is an offshoot of EUA and UNESCO. Those are the good days, I say, because the Turkish universities is with a very good profile during those days in Europe. I don't think we can, I mean, we were elected to those positions on the strength of our universities. I don't think we enjoy that position right now. And yes, I'm sure about that. The question of whether we have similar institutions in Turkey, no, we don't. I mean, perhaps this event might lead us to form some kind of an association. What we have is, which is quite different from other universities, is that we have an organized alumni association, one of the strongest in Turkey. And in fact, it's acting as a lobby too these days. But apart from that, we need really an organization of higher education in Turkey, which is not Higher Education Council, which is really an NGO. And there were several attempts. We made several attempts to kick off something like that about 3-4 years ago, but it did not materialize. Perhaps this might help. This might help us devise an NGO like that, because for the first time in my memory, there were supports, although not as strong as I would like to see, but there were support was coming from other universities, mainly from Middle East Technical University, which is one of the key institutions, I think, in Turkey. And we sort of, we are sort of two good fellows of the higher education system in Turkey. I don't want to go to the historical reasons for that, but that's, maybe I'm reading too much into these developments. I hope we come up with an NGO of that emphasizes university autonomy, because we really need it. Boğaziçi University flourished on autonomy, institutional autonomy, and academic freedom. Because, for example, you mentioned Gülay's stand stood behind the petitioners in Turkey, which is a reflection of the heritage, the values of the institution. I remember in the 1970s, there were students involved in leftist movements, and the police would come onto the campus looking for students, and those students were milling around in the campus, and nobody gave them up. And those students these days, they are some executives or important places in the Turkish society and the economic system. We could have easily lost them during those days. So what I'm trying to emphasize here, that this institution has a very, is a very strong set of values of how we do things. That's why I'm hopeful about the future. I think that those values have also been internalized a lot by the alumni. Now, whether we can extend that into Turkey, that's another story, because the higher education in Turkey is highly heterogeneous. You have the private universities on the one hand, and you have new universities. I mean, the president the other day said that we have now 206 universities, and Angela Merkel of Germany was surprised, he said. He was sort of making a propaganda that we are far ahead. We have more universities than Germany. But those universities, are they universities? I'm not so sure.
Thank you.
I'll stop here. I can go on.
I will just say something in support of what you said. Sorry, I was corrected, and I wrote this on chat. An audience member reminded me that Barbarosoğlu was not the only university president. Ahmet Acar, former rector of ODTÜ, Middle East Technical University, also rejected an investigation against his family and the peace petition, they said. And that supports what you're saying, which is Middle East Technical University and Boğaziçi University both have a certain degree of autonomous institutional history. And you're right, among private universities, perhaps it's there are, I believe, some private universities that actually care a lot for institutional autonomy. And one of them, as far as I can tell, is Sabancı, that also
you're right.
treated its faculty who were signatories very well.
But it's faculty,
universities are not like that. I don't want to keep people further up. It is 11:30 p.m. in Turkey, but Mert Hoca didn't get a chance to say something in this very last round, and he represents the future. So let's have him as the for the last word. Buyurun Mert Hocam.
Right. Thank you so much. I wanna add on to the kind of pick up on this point about these new horizontal ties that are emerging across institutions, across universities, as well as an emerging public debate, obviously, in light of the events that are going on in Boğaziçi. I think these are really important, and they kind of tie to one point that Ersin Hoca previously made about unpredictability. And I think unpredictability is not only about Turkish politics or what is inherent to it, but it's inherent to mobilization movements and these moments of these events. So we really need to be aware of the contingency and uncertainty that is inherent to such moments, positively and negatively. And what that I think tells us is that although strategizing is important, what is more important is I think being committed to continuous collective action, maintaining solidarity, and doing the best you can as different actors with different positions in this movement to bring about change. In what temporal horizon and scope it will come about, we cannot really know. But when we, I think, set our temporal horizons, we should also take the invincibility performances of autocrats too seriously. Obviously, it's serious, but we shouldn't also too much succumb to the kind of image that they want to project. And in that, I think the temporal horizon, at what horizon things will change, we cannot really know. What we know is, I think, that commitment to action. That's the first point that I want to make. The second point is about, I think, students. One thing that we kind of forget is that, unlike us, the students, some of our students actually experience what we are right now going through. They experienced it when they were high school students. When they were high school students in Anatolian high schools, most of our students are from very good public public high schools that we call Anatolian high schools. And their directors were actually changed back in 2015 under the law called, I think, the project schools. And along with the change in their directors, their teachers change, and the kind of institutional cultures of these established high schools also change. So in many ways, they might have more political experience than we do in kind of encountering such things. And I think that kind of, like these people actually came of age under Turkey's this autocratic transformation. When they entered this university, there was state of emergency. They saw the coup d'etat, they saw the state of emergency. Now they're seeing this, they saw the pandemic emergency. Like, this is a generation that lived under, came of age under emergencies in a way. And I think in one way that it also kind of, I don't want to over romanticize here, but it kind of, give them some sort of an understanding and reading of the situation. And obviously they make mistakes. Obviously they try to negotiate their differences, but I think they also kind of, find very creative ways to maintain their solidarity and engage in action despite all the differences that they have. And in that sense, again, without romanticizing the situation, I think, we should also have some sort of trust in their political subjectivities and the kind of course of action that they will take, the kind of discourses that they will produce. And some of the videos that you've shown today is actually great illustrations of that, but they're not the only one. That's only one group. There are many other groups, and they don't coordinate their things. And sometimes they, discuss and fight among themselves, but one way or the other, I think, ultimately they find, the common ground to maintain solidarity and to act. together. So, let me stop there.
Perhaps, I just want to add a sentence. Perhaps what could come out of this, conference, what could come out of this conference is precisely finding an organization, like Üstün said, that deals with academic, university autonomy and academic freedom. Now that so many people are here, I can't see all of them, but I'm sure they're graduates.
One second, I'm going to tell you something right about that. One of the audience members was just asking me, could Üstün Hoca say something more detailed about an NGO? What kind of steps could be taken? I'm reading, and this person says that she would like to start something like this. So maybe in touch with this person after the meeting for some more concrete steps to consider.
An NGO might be difficult because you need permission from the government, but a platform, of people, of graduates who live abroad or who teach abroad, for example, as well as graduates who teach in various universities inside the country, plus, of course, Boğaziçi faculty. We could do that. Your thoughts?
But I don't want to keep going. Because
I think that would be wonderful.
People are going to go to sleep. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to the person who asked us and connect you with them. And another audience member reminded me there were other faculties that sent support messages to Boğaziçi from Istanbul University, from Koç. There were messages. Another
Istanbul Technical University.
Mimar Sinan is a place where petition signatories were kept. Yeah. Kadir Has was another one where they were protected. So maybe the situation is not as dire as it does sound pretty dire, but maybe it is not as bad as it sounds, and maybe we should not blacken our text, as they say in Turkish, and say karartmayalım. I want to end with, another audience member is sending a note, Research Institute on Turkey. That is something that's happening in the States right now. I will end with yet another student video so that, because they are the ones who are our future. And I thank you all so much for making all this time, standing here for 3.5 hours now. So I thank you. Thank you so much for all of your patience. This is the one, and for those who don't speak Turkish, this is the one where the students are responding to being called terrorists, and they say why, they are what they were doing and why they don't really deserve that label at all, and why they were called terrorists. For doing what were they called terrorists?
Bu eserin değerlerime aykırı olduğunu düşünüyorum.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü okulumda özgürlük istedim.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü kurumumun 150 yıllık kültürüne saygı duymasını istedim.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü tek sesliliği değil, çok sesliliği savunuyorum.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü anayasal sınırların dışına çıkmadan meşru protesto hakkımı kullandım. Terörist ilan edildim çünkü üniversitemde hür ortam istiyorum.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü üniversitemin iradesine saygı duyulmasını istiyorum.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü atanmış değil, seçilmiş rektör istiyorum.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü demokrasi istedim.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü üniversitemin özelliğini korumak istedim.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü üniversitemde akademik özgürlük istedim.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü siyasi iktidardan farklı düşünüyorum.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü üniversitemin değerlerine saygı duyulsun istedim.
Terörist ilan edildim çünkü üniversitemde rektörü kendim seçmek istedim.
Thank you. They were saying they were called terrorists for wanting democracy, for thinking differently than the government party, for seeking academic freedom, for seeking university autonomy. Thank you all for staying. Thank you, especially our panelists, for having so much patience for more than 3.5 hours. And perhaps we'll do another one of those at some point. We don't usually do current Turkey events. We just started doing things about Ottoman and Turkish studies, but it looks like there is a lot of interest, and perhaps we could be together again at an event soon. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
We thank you. Bye.